the Industrial Revolution of the Mage Lord. Hello again, dear adventurers of the multiverse. Thanks for joining us once more on this epic journey. Remember, this story is pure science fiction from our wild imagination. So don't go trying to summon dragons in your backyard. The rights of this amazing novel belong entirely to its original author. We are only the narrators. Do you want more adventures? Show some love to our YouTube channel with a subscription and a like. And if you want exclusive content, our Patreon is waiting for you with open arms. Chapter 26, The Witch Hunter returns to his own business. Geoffrey hadn't been happy lately. Although his father had made a bargain with a vicious necromancer, selling his body for an unimaginably high price after his death, leaving him an inheritance sufficient to provide him and his sister with a comfortable life, he still harbored a sense of resentment and a slight, unsatisfied resentment. The mages of the Union and the usually kind priests of the church had all sided with the evil necromancer, accusing him of greed. He had hoped that Lord Burko, who loathed necromancers, would seek justice for him. Instead, he was met with humiliation and a slap in the face that knocked out several of his teeth. Geoffrey dared not show his resentment to their faces, let alone cause trouble for the mages. He was just a lowly commoner with no background, and there was nothing he could do except secretly curse them while hunched over the tavern's gambling table. After migrating to Grizzleburg with a noble's caravan, Geoffrey, using the excuse that as the eldest son he deserved a larger share of the inheritance, gave his sister, who had been clamoring for a share of the inheritance, a few gold pounds to send her way, urging her to take the money and seek refuge with a knight squire with whom she had long been involved. Grizzleburg was far more prosperous than Jackdaw Town, and the city's numerous taverns and gambling dens captivated him. Within days, he had squandered the money from selling his father's body. That night, Geoffrey lay awake in his rented tavern room when he heard footsteps at the door, followed by the rattle of the bolt, and someone quietly entered. "Who is it?" He pulled a knife from his belt, squinting his eyes and trembling in the darkness. "Don't move, and don't shout," the man whispered in a menacing whisper, but Geoffrey recognized the voice. It was Stanley Kane, the deacon of Jackdaw Town Church. "Yes, is that Mr. Kane?" The candlesticks were lit by the flames, illuminating the room with a dim glow. The church deacon, Stanley, removed his gray-black cloak, pulled a chair over, and sat down before Geoffrey. "I have something to tell you, Geoffrey." He habitually scratched his chin, where a long, hideous scar marked the spot, a stark contrast to his gentle demeanor as a church deacon. "What do you want from me?" Geoffrey obediently sheathed his knife and glanced at the sharp, unsheathed sword hanging from his waist. "You've been to the manor of that necromancer named Harvey, haven't you?" Stanley whispered. Yes, because of my father. Everyone in town knows about that." The deacon interrupted him impatiently. "Don't talk nonsense. I need you to lead the way to that manor." Geoffrey was startled and stammered. What? Why, do you want me to take you there?" Stanley sneered. "What? Are you scared? Don't you want to avenge your father?" Geoffrey's drunken words in the tavern reached his ears word for word. Did you intend to deal with that necromancer?" Geoffrey stuttered nervously, unable to form a complete sentence for a long time. "I won't let you go in vain. After this is accomplished, I will find you a position in the Church of Grizzly Castle, and a sum of money as your reward." He pulled a coarse cloth purse from his waist and slammed it onto Geoffrey's bed, grinning provocatively. "What do you think? Will you take this deal?" Geoffrey picked up the purse, weighed it, a flicker of resentment in his eyes. After a moment's thought, he gritted his teeth and asked, "You just need me to lead the way, right?" Stanley nodded in confirmation. "I will." Stanley Kane wasn't a priest who had undergone systematic training or church training. He was an orphan adopted into a monastery. His initial life in the monastery was difficult, until he was chosen by the head monk to become a reserve squire of the Inquisition. After 10 years of training, young Stanley was naturally dispatched to the Evil Moon Mountains, the main battlefield between the human coalition and the demons, where he experienced life and death trials in the blood and fire. Upon completing his garrison duty, Stanley's bravery and accumulated military achievements earned him the honor of being ordained by the Archbishop in the Holy City. There, he successfully awakened his bloodline power, becoming a glorious knight of the Inquisition and receiving the careful training of the Archbishop. He also learned the sacred history of the Church, including the truth about the 100 Years' War between the Church and the sorcerers. Those evil spellcasters who seized divine power and authority, shielded and condoned by the nobles, brazenly blasphemed the great god of light and the realm illuminated by the divine light. The archbishop informed him that the divine punishment faction still existed within the church, advocating the expulsion of sorcerers from the realm ruled by the gods and their glorious judgment. Stanley was assigned to the witch-hunting knights, a secret order established by the church, for training. Following the witch-hunting knights, they participated in numerous covert operations to eliminate small spellcasting organizations and wizard families. Their final mission involved a mission to the Principality of St. Valen to attack a group of itinerant spellcasters passing through. However, a fortuitous event occurred. 2 mid-level undead spellcasters were hidden within the seemingly vulnerable group of apprentices. Taking advantage of the witch-hunting knights' relaxed vigilance, they unleashed a devastating plague fog and commanded powerful stitched corpses to launch a sudden attack. The knights suffered heavy casualties, with the knight commander and the stitched corpses perishing together. To avoid exposing their identities, the fragile alliance between the Spellcasters' Union and the Church was shattered. The remaining knights fought to the death, but Stanley was the only one who escaped death when a magical thorn pierced his throat and tumbled down a cliff, mistakenly presumed dead. After this attack, Stanley did not return to the Holy City Church. Instead, he took up residence in Jackdaw Town as a deacon. He never gave up his hatred for wizards, nor did he forget the tragic experiences of losing his comrades and his entire army. However, under the watchful eyes of the Union, he found few opportunities to strike at those damned spellcasters. But now, his chance had arrived. That arrogant and foolish necromancer, Harvey, had the absurd idea of remaining alone in Jackdaw Town. Before leaving for Grizzlyburg, Stanley had secretly approached his estate several times to observe. The necromancer was accompanied by only a single alchemical puppet, not a single living corpse. If he couldn't give him enough time to cast a spell, a close-range attack on a junior spellcaster would only take a few breaths to kill him. As for the civilian named Jeffrey, his role as a guide was a fabricated excuse. His true purpose was to serve as a scapegoat for the Union's subsequent investigation after Stanley had killed the necromancer. His father had been killed by the necromancer, and the son had colluded with mysterious outsiders to infiltrate the manor and avenge his father. This reason was perfect, completely plausible. As for who the outsider was, it didn't matter. He only needed to slightly alter his posture and keep his face covered. Even if the Union investigators used a replay spell, they wouldn't be able to find out. The witch hunter gripped a sword at his waist, squinting his eyes as he peered through the walls of Grizzly Castle toward Jackdaw Town. At that moment, his only thought was, hunt down the evil wizard and restore the glory of the gods, and avenge his fallen companions. Chapter 27, Attack on a Rainy Night. The last time he visited this manor on the outskirts of Jackdaw Town was during the day. Geoffrey vaguely remembered that this country retreat, once owned by a baron, back onto a vast orchard. The wall, constructed of a stone brick base and wooden lattices, was barely a meter high. If the nearby townspeople and farmers hadn't known that a necromancer resided here, anyone could easily climb over and steal the fruits and vegetables. Although it was nearly midnight, Geoffrey and the witch hunter Stanley, stealthily approaching the manor, dared not light torches. Necromancers often preferred nocturnal activity, and this was their working time. Following Geoffrey's guidance, Stanley carefully circled the manor's walls, deftly debunking every trigger-activated magic trap, a tactic he'd used in his past attacks on solitary spellcasters. The young necromancer didn't seem completely defenseless, but his methods were naive. Stanley scoffed inwardly. It was natural for civilians to fear necromancers, but he'd never heard of a necromancer fearing an ordinary civilian. Living people, in their eyes, were nothing more than raw experimental material, eager to be delivered to their doorstep. This arrogant and foolish outlook suited Stanley perfectly. In the past, he'd often exploited this common arrogance among spellcasters to attack numerous apprentices and low-level spellcasters. The two of them tiptoed over the fence and reached the side wall of the manor building. There's no light in the main building. The necromancer isn't in his room, Stanley muttered doubtfully, his gloomy gaze fixed on the trembling Jeffrey. I don't know. The last time I was here, it was daytime, and I only went into the first-floor reception room and the spacious laboratory cellar next door. Stanley was stunned. Wasn't the main building the necromancer's primary area of activity? Jeffrey stammered, his laboratory is behind the main building, near the orchard. The witch hunter nodded slightly and pulled Jeffrey closer to the wall, sneaking behind the main building. Suddenly, a faint rumble of thunder echoed overhead. Stanley was delighted. A rainstorm was approaching. Tonight was the perfect time to attack. The sound of thunder would mask their infiltration and erase any traces. The witch hunter slowly approached a low, spacious laboratory, stopping in front of a closed window. He pulled a thin, ruler-like metal piece from his belt and deftly inserted it into the gap between the window frames. With a soft click, the latch inside slid open, and the window gently opened. Even the laboratory doors and windows lack special locking mechanisms. Such an amateur. Stanley straightened slightly and tilted his head to peer through the window. Inside appeared to be a separate storage room, with shelves lined against the wall with bottles and jars. He confidently pushed the window open, gripping the frame with one hand. With a gentle push, he quietly climbed inside. He turned back and dragged the clumsy Geoffrey into the storage room. "I'll go out and scout. You wait in this compartment. Don't touch anything, and don't make any noise." Geoffrey nodded, his teeth chattering. Sneaking into a spellcaster's laboratory was a suicidal act he had never dared to contemplate. Not to mention the pale skulls on the shelves and the unknown flesh and organs in glass containers in this room. It all frightened him to the point of his legs feeling as weak as dough, unable to move. Stanley couldn't be bothered to comfort this disposable scapegoat. He drew the unsheathed longsword hanging from his waist, pushed open the storage room door, and tiptoed out. The experimental workshop was much larger than expected. Aside from two separate storage rooms at the end, all windows were sealed with iron sheets, with only a few circular vents near the top of the walls for ventilation. The entire workshop was deserted, with only the echoing sound of witch hunters' boots treading the floor. Numerous pried open crates lay haphazardly discarded in corners. From the ceiling hung a tangled web of metal pipes, cascading down like dried vines to the ground, connecting to a number of bizarre instruments completely unfamiliar to Stanley. The most prominent one, a massive metal cylinder nearly 5 meters tall, stood in the center of the room. Its heavy base was engraved with densely packed magical inscriptions, and it lit up and dimmed repeatedly, like breathing. Some mechanism seemed to be operating within the metal cylinder. A faint, continuous humming sound could be heard, blending seamlessly with the sudden downpour and thunder outside. The necromancer was clearly not in his laboratory either. Had he miscalculated, and had he secretly left Jackdaw Town and traveled outside Grizzleburg? Stanley felt a sense of dejection. If he couldn't carry out his attack tonight, finding another opportunity would mean another long period of lurking and waiting. He slowly approached the massive alchemical apparatus, pondering how to destroy the magical artifacts used for these vile and blasphemous experiments. With a heavy rain, setting it on fire was clearly unrealistic. Acting alone, he couldn't obtain flammable materials like dragon flame or kerosene. He could only search the necromancer's experiments for any familiar alchemical materials with explosive or corrosive properties that he could use. Just as he was about to conduct a thorough search, a metal cover suddenly flipped up from the ground not far away. The witch hunter's eyes narrowed slightly, and he immediately and silently rolled behind the metal cylinder, his longsword tightly gripped, staring straight ahead. Before every rainstorm, I have to check the underground storage room. Otherwise, the next day, all these zombie transformation materials will be soaked into human-shaped pancakes, Harvey muttered irritably as he clumsily climbed out of the cellar. He pushed over the metal sheet placed next to the cover and squatted down to pass it down from the cellar entrance. Someone seemed to be taking over from below. "Sir, you don't have to do this all by yourself every time. I can handle it myself," the witch hunter heard another voice in the cellar. "You're my assistant, not my apprentice. More people means more efficiency." The man on the ground was his target, the necromancer named Harvey. He was facing him with his back completely exposed, crouching down, facing the cellar entrance, talking to someone below. Unprepared, Stanley switched his longsword from his right hand to two hands, pointing the tip at the unconscious caster's back. He pumped his abdomen and took a deep breath, mobilizing the bloodline strength that had slightly weakened with age. 1 breath. 2 breaths. 3. "Who are you?" A sudden shout came from behind him. He was discovered. "My lord, be careful." Without the slightest hesitation, Stanley stood up, stomped his feet hard on the ground. And with a huge forward force, he suddenly pounced on Harvey's back. Harvey felt as if there was a scorching wind blowing towards him from behind, and his back seemed to feel a slight sharp sting. A sense of crisis of being locked in by a ferocious beast instantly made his scalp numb. He heard Pierce's loud warning to him, but it was too late to make any extra reaction. He could only fall forward in a mess, and rolled headfirst into the cellar with a thud. If you are listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, It means it was downloaded and re-uploaded without effort. We warmly invite you to visit our channel, Fanfic World. There you will find the original version of this story and many other novels of various genres. We look forward to seeing you dive into a world of incredible novels. Chapter 28 Courage and Iron Fist. With his lunge, Stanny had anticipated the opponent's potential evasive rolls. But he'd overlooked the necromancer's unexpected lurch forward, careening headfirst into the cellar he'd just emerged from. Though his strike, which he'd expected to hide him, had missed, the witch hunter remained unfazed. He twisted his ankle, a deft flick of his toe. The cellar cover lifted, then slammed back into place, firmly covering the entrance. With another hard step, he placed his sword's tip precisely on the catch, locking the entrance shut and preventing the two known individuals below from raising it again. Now, he needed to deal with the one who'd spotted him and warned the necromancer. Pierce usually moved about the manor without his bow and arrow, his forte. Normally, he'd be asleep in his warm bed by this time of day. But tonight, the weather looked unfavorable, with a heavy rainstorm imminent. Harvey and Reiner had gone to the lab again, leaving Pierce worried they'd be drenched on their return to the main building. He was carrying only 2 raincoats and wearing only thin cotton and linen pajamas. Though unarmed, his years of hunting experience still made him acutely aware of the enemy's vehement intent. He immediately dropped his burdensome clothing and ducked behind the massive metal column of Unit 00. This was his usual evasive maneuver when encountering black bears in Jackdaw Ridge. It was a shame the lab lacked a single tree, otherwise, he could have leaped to treetop in just 3 seconds. But the witch hunter, Stanny, was no clumsy beast. Invigorated by his knightly bloodline, he moved at speeds far superior to those of mortals. The gleaming sword in his hand was even more terrifying than the bear's claws and fangs, intimidating Pierce. He narrowly avoided the opponent's first horizontal swing, the blade colliding with the brass shaft of the alchemical instrument with a deafening reverberation. Clang. Pierce felt a chill down his spine. The enemy's sword had still sliced through his clothes. But there was no noticeable pain. He knew it wasn't because he wasn't injured. The blood rushing through him in the face of life and death would make those desperate for survival run for 2 miles, even with their intestines dragging. The hunter tumbled onto a pile of crates, only then realizing that warm liquid was leaking from his back, soaking his torn clothes. Lord Harvey and Reiner were still trapped in the cellar. And Mr. Asdalin, unable to move, was doomed to death by this assailant. I must not escape. A streak of silver lightning flashed across the sky, and a mighty rumble of thunder echoed. Light streamed through the vents into the workshop, illuminating Pierce's pale, sweat-stained face. Without a word, the hooded, face-hiding attacker lunged at him again. A flash of sword pierced through his ribs, aiming for the hunter's heart. The strike was lightning fast, stealthy and swift. By the time Pierce noticed it, it was too late to dodge. Desperate, he could only kick his legs, his body flung backward, a sharp pain in his chest. He tumbled twice before quickly standing, grabbing a crowbar and struggling to take a defensive stance. Huh? You dodged it? The witch hunter kicked aside the crates blocking his path and advanced towards him. The hunter was cornered. Who are you? Why are you attacking Lord Harvey? He's a mage from the Union, Pierce stammered. His eyes anxiously glancing at the metal lab table covered with a tarp and the locked cellar entrance. Dead men don't have so many problems, the witch hunter chuckled sinisterly, raising his sword again. Stop, a weak shout echoed, and Stanny instinctively turned his head in the direction of the voice. A metal lab table covered with a thin cotton sheet. The witch hunter snorted coldly, extending his sword and prying the sheet aside, revealing a coffin-sized transparent ore within. And a strange figure, completely encased in the ore, with only the head visible. The figure frowned, glaring at Stanny with fury. Huh? A necromancer's evil creation? The witch hunter frowned, unsure if it was a half-formed stitched corpse or some other unknown undead experiment. He instinctively swung his sword at the humanoid's neck. Arslan, unable to move, closed his eyes with a wry smile, awaiting death. Suddenly, he felt his face heat up, a splash of warm liquid spraying onto it. He opened his eyes abruptly and saw Hunter Pierce lunge at him, his chest pierced by the sword's blade, revealing a sharp, cold gleam half an inch deep. You? Pierce spat out another mouthful of blood, splattering into Asdalin's eyes, but he didn't close his eyes to avoid it. The hunter loosened his grip on the amber ore and slid to the ground. With a loud bang, the metal cover of the cellar flew into the air and smashed directly into the ceiling of the workshop. Reiner leaped out of the cellar, the once dark blue soul fire in the eye sockets of his skull now turning into a blazing white light. "Pierce," he roared with a metallic grinding sound. Harvey fell into the cellar, hitting Reiner's metal body, and his eyes rolled back, and he fainted. In his panic, Reiner thought he had been ambushed. After a while of checking and fiddling with Harvey, he found no wounds or bleeding. This delayed him for 2 or 3 minutes. When he returned to the surface, he was greeted by a scene that made him tear his eyes out. "A bastard," the inscriptions on the alchemical body instantly illuminated. His powerful metal legs slammed into the ground, plowing a deep groove into the hardened earth. He lunged at the sword-wielding witch hunter, striking him in the head with a powerful punch. Blade and fist collided with a resounding thud, sending sparks flying from the friction. The witch hunter's body trembled violently, and he stumbled back several steps, glancing at the twisting blade in his hand with disbelief. "You bastard," Reiner roared again, lunging at the enemy without hesitation. In his rage, he seemed to have forgotten even his favorite weapon, the flame-welding torch, and instinctively swung his fists at his foe. A long-lost fear gripped the witch hunter's throat. Others might not know it, but he knew the immense power he, as a blood knight, could unleash upon his bloodline abilities. But facing the talking, metal-armored skeletal monster before him, he seemed as weak as a preteen. Each blow he received resonated with him, reminiscent of facing the onslaught of demonic beasts on the battlefield of yesteryear, overwhelming force and overwhelming power. After 3 blows, the sword, unable to withstand the weight, snapped, leaving the witch hunter helpless as Reiner's blow struck his shoulder hard. A terrifying sound of bones snapping echoed as the foe soared into the air, slamming heavily into a pile of shattered crates. "You bastard! You bastard! You bastard!" The furious roars continued. Bleeding to the ground, Pierce's last sight was Reiner's massive alchemical form, straddling his foe, hammering him down with blow after blow, until his chest caved in, a bloody mess of flesh. Chapter 29, One Life for Another. When Harvey regained consciousness and stumbled out of the cellar, he discovered the lab in utter disarray. Hunter Pierce, stabbed in the chest, lay pale and bloody, his life or death uncertain. Trapped in the amber ore, as Dallin lay face down, blood splattered all over his face, his eyes closed, unresponsive. Reiner, meanwhile, lay face down on a mangled, bloodied corpse, its true form unrecognizable. Apparently, his energy was depleted and he had overheated and shut down. "I used a magic trinket to share my life with Pierce. He can still be saved," as Dallin suddenly opened his eyes and uttered weakly. Harvey nodded, quickly pulling out a charging line and inserting it into the socket on Reiner's waist. While waiting for Reiner to recharge, he immediately returned to the main manor building and retrieved a hemostatic potion from the study. He poured half into the mouth of the now deeply comatose Pierce and sprinkled the other half onto the puncture wound in his chest. He now dared not move Pierce's body, and he couldn't find a priest capable of performing divine healing spells to aid him. The people of Jackdaw Town had long since evacuated to Grizzle Castle. Previously, he'd managed to treat non-fatal wounds with potions he'd prepared, which had some effect. But with this clearly life-threatening injury, there was nothing he could do except for high-level divine healing spells. "Asterin, how long can you maintain your shared life?" The hybrid's already pale face now took on a faint tinge of gray. With difficulty, he whispered, "The magic trinket draws on my spiritual energy to achieve the effects of shared life. I can only last 2 hours at most." Reiner had already regained consciousness, wiping the blood and flesh splattered all over his body with a bewildered look, seemingly still recovering from his recent outburst. "Sir, I just killed someone," he trembled as he asked, the answer already known, a hint of tears in his voice. Harvey sighed, his mind suddenly overwhelmed. He could only offer solace. "Reiner, you were trying to save Pierce and Dallin. Don't blame yourself too much, after all, he was the first alchemical being to possess human consciousness and normal emotions, a stark contrast to those cold, inanimate objects that relied solely on spells for their actions." Harvey could understand his fear and helplessness after his first murder. He was simply concerned that his sudden outburst might be due to the fusion of his alchemical body with his soul, causing some degree of abnormality. But there was no time to delve into this further. Pierce's life was in danger, and without a readily available alchemical body, Harvey had no chance of saving him through soul transfer. Asterin pondered for a moment, then said slowly, "There's another way. Perhaps we can try to save Mr. Pierce." He shifted his gaze, glancing towards the storage room against the workshop wall. He whispered, But we need to deal with another problem first. There's another person hiding in that storage room. I smell their scent, a fishy smell. A vampire's 5 senses far surpass those of a human. Asterin had already sniffed out the location of the other hidden enemy the moment he discovered the attacker. He simply puzzled why, despite the intense battle, the enemy remained hunkered down there, never rushing to help his comrade, who watched helplessly as Reiner hammered him to death. Harvey's face was solemn. While he trusted Asterin, the hybrid vampire's natural judgment, he dared not underestimate him in the slightest. Without any spell materials nearby, he couldn't cast Acid Splash, Poison Mist, or Corrosion. The magic patterns hadn't yet been inscribed with a matrix for instantaneous spells. As a research-based spellcaster, the only offensive spell he could currently activate through incantation was a recently learned spell called Spiritual Blast. This was a second-level psychic attack spell, not strictly necromancy, but capable of harnessing the energy of death. Its effect was to temporarily stun the enemy, disrupting their mental strength and thinking. Considering this spell couldn't directly harm the enemy hiding in the storage room, Harvey picked up the crowbar Pierce had dropped and, with quiet footsteps, approached the door. Using his mage's hand, he pushed the door open while standing beside it, chanting a spell, ready to cast. Woo woo woo, don't kill me. Don't kill me. I didn't do anything. Woo woo woo, yes, he forced me to lead the way. A figure tumbled out of the dark room, dressed in tattered civilian clothes, his trouser legs stained with mud. Tears streamed down his pale face, a disgusting mess. Hey, isn't this Reiner's biological son, Jeffrey? Harvey's brow furrowed slightly, and he instantly understood the whole story. Jeffrey must have been harboring a grudge over Reiner's death. Even after the Union's investigation, he still believed that this evil necromancer had murdered his father. Your original plan was to kill me? Where did you find that attacker? Harvey asked coldly, glancing at Reiner, who was still recharging his powers. No. I didn't. Master Harvey, I wouldn't dare. It was him. He's the deacon of the church, Stanny. He forced me to bring him here. All the attacks were his machinations. Jeffrey's defense was incoherent. Harvey's heart sank as he keenly heard the word church. The church was still trying to hunt spellcasters? They were actually ignoring the non-aggression pact they had signed with the Union. Perhaps it was only targeting necromancers? Or perhaps it was only targeting him, a single necromancer? Harvey didn't know what the Union branch in Jackdaw Town thought of this matter, but those spellcasters like Burko, who clearly discriminated against necromancers, were probably gloating. He couldn't just let it go. He had to find a way to expose this matter. He didn't want to see the relationship between the Union and the church worsen. Suffering in silence wasn't in Harvey's character. This guy had been causing him trouble time and time again, and even brought him into mortal danger. He couldn't be soft-hearted and spare his life. But he certainly couldn't let him die in his own manner right now, at least not in front of his father, Reiner. He'd pretend to let him go first, then have Pierce sneak over to deal with this problem. Get lost, Harvey said coldly. Letting Jeffrey go publicly would also deter the witch hunters lurking in the church who harbored malicious intent against him. After watching Jeffrey flee the lab in a panic, Harvey turned back to Pierce and Asdalin, who lay lying on the ground. What's that method you mentioned that could save Pierce? Asdalin curled his lips, seeming to scorn Harvey's soft-heartedness. Draw my blood and inject it into Mr. Pierce. Harvey was stunned. Vampire blood is a high-level spellcasting ingredient. Even for alchemical potions, the proportions of auxiliary materials must be carefully considered. Just injecting it directly into an ordinary human? Could Pierce really handle it? How much should be injected? Are there any side effects? Asdalin said calmly, all of it. I need to draw all of my blood to replace Pierce's own. You can think of it as a direct blood transfusion. He glanced at the hunter lying on the ground with a complicated look and smiled bitterly. As for the side effects, of course, you'll become a hybrid like me, afraid of sunlight, loving darkness, and occasionally craving blood. What about you? A vampire whose blood has been drained? How long will it take to recover? Do you need me to find you some animal blood? Asdalin and Harvey exchanged concerned glances, smiling gently. Have you forgotten? I was already dying, and Pierce tried his best to save me. Mortals always don't value their own lives. How foolish. So I think a life for a life is perfectly fair and reasonable. I don't want to owe him anything. Chapter 30 The Best of Both Worlds. What? Pierce doesn't agree. Asdalin was surprised. Doesn't he want to live? A thought suddenly struck him. And he frowned, pressing the issue. Does he hate vampires? Does he not want his human bloodline to be contaminated? Or does he not want to turn into a monster? It's not that he doesn't want to live. Harvey shook his head. He doesn't discriminate against your vampire identity, he just said that if your life is exchanged for his own, he can't accept it. As Dallin paused, seemingly unable to comprehend this choice, and remained silent for a long time. I think if you don't want Pierce to die because of you, perhaps offering him a promise that you'll be safe and sound would make him more willing to agree to the blood transfusion plan. Harvey decided to strike while the iron was hot, trying to rekindle Dallin's desire to live. After all, Pierce was just a human being, severely injured. He wouldn't survive until the alchemical prosthesis Harvey had purchased arrived. Dallin, as a hybrid, was significantly more resilient. Having him transfuse his blood first to save the hunter's life, while he waited for the soul transfer experiment, was the most appropriate option. Dallin closed his eyes and sighed softly. Alright, I agree to the soul transfer plan you proposed earlier. He paused, then added emphatically, but remember, this is to repay Pierce. Please grant me the right to choose to end my own fate at any time. Harvey was overjoyed, standing up and excitedly saying, of course, I will never force you to make a choice. The alchemical instrument Unit 0 erupted with a strong humming sound. After carefully adjusting it, Harvey repeatedly entered the magic network and transmitted batches of pre-disassembled alchemical prostheses. These were generously provided by the alchemist known as Mirror Man on the Magic Network forum. That evening, after the forum exchange meeting, he suddenly approached Harvey's small account and offered to provide him with one of the Exploration Society's latest alchemical prostheses, a supplementary model, free of charge. Harvey did not need to pay any points or money or materials. During their private conversation, the Mirror Man spoke with encouragement and sympathy, repeatedly praising his passion and persistence in experimental research, which surprised and delighted Harvey, but also left him confused. Although he didn't understand the other party's true intentions, Harvey didn't care about getting this much-needed alchemical prosthesis for free. After receiving the goods, he and Reiner immediately began assembling them. This time, he had to simultaneously perform Pierce's blood transfusion and Dallin's soul transfer. This was both an experiment and a surgery, carrying an extremely high risk, and there was no room for error. Reiner, check the alchemical prosthesis's energy circuits again. Harvey busied himself with preparations at the metal lab table. Pierce, who alternated between lucidity and coma, was carefully placed side by side with Dallin. Several metal pipes connected them, ultimately converging on the massive metal cylinder of Unit 00. Harvey's plan was to drain Pierce's excess blood first, then simultaneously inject blood drawn from Dallin, replacing both in equal proportions. This would ensure that Pierce wouldn't suffer from excessive blood loss first. As for Dallin, once his blood loss reached a certain level, he would immediately initiate the soul transfer. This ensured that even after the soul transfer was complete, his body, now a corpse, could still provide Pierce with the last of his remaining blood for a short period of time. In theory, it was a perfect rescue plan. The sky gradually brightened, and the mist that always rose at the foot of the mountain in Jackdaw Town in the early morning gradually dissipated. The thunderstorm that had been raging all night also subsided, and the air was filled with a fresh scent of earth. Dallin seemed to be gradually waking from a long dream. After a dizzy spell, he slowly and tentatively opened his eyes. He saw Harvey, his thin face with dark circles under his eyes, leaning in front of him. With difficulty, he turned his head and saw Reiner on the other side. The metal-inlaid skull, the faint blue soul fire slowly flickering in his eye sockets. He opened his mouth, but found his voice was a little hoarse, with a slight hissing sound of metal rubbing against bone. Is Pierce still alive? Harvey nodded and smiled. Pierce woke up before you. I had Reiner move him to his own room to rest. He's still a little weak. It was undeniable that vampires' natural abilities were truly formidable. Having just undergone a blood transfusion, Pierce's wounds, both large and small, were already showing signs of healing. However, the fatal penetrating chest wound only served to stop the bleeding. After Reiner stitched him up, he would still need some time to recover. At least Harvey didn't have to worry about infection. Dallin subconsciously half-raised himself, feeling the metallic clacking of the alchemical prosthesis as it operated. He then raised his intricately constructed, all-metal hands for closer inspection. Reiner stepped forward, grasping his shoulder. He said with a hearty laugh, Mr. Dallin, you have no idea how much I envy you. This is the prosthetic skeleton the Lord personally obtained from the alchemy quest. It's so much better than this cheap, bone-stitched thing I have now. Look at this ingenious structure, this powerful energy output, this sleek, beautiful shape." Harvey winked at Reiner frantically, feeling like his face was cramping. "Reiner, could you please not bring this up at a time like this? It's just irrelevant." As Dallin listened quietly, seemingly showing no signs of collapse or loss, he slowly stood up, using the lab table as support, and stepped down. He seemed a little unaccustomed to the force of his metal legs and feet contacting the ground. "It'll be a little hard at first, and you might overexert yourself or lose your balance," Harvey explained softly. "Every 6 hours, you need to recharge your prosthetic. When you're inside the manor, you can simply use this energy matrix." Harvey pointed to the unit 0 in the center of the room. "If you're going out, you'll need to carry recharge magic stones, just like Reiner. Primary magic stones only provide 2 hours of energy, while intermediate magic stones provide 6 hours of activity. I'll raise money to purchase higher level magic stones later to ensure you and Reiner can store as much magic energy as possible. I'm not sure yet if you'll be able to cast spells as well after the transformation. We'll try again after you've adjusted for a while. Pay attention to the inscriptions and joints on your prosthetic. If there's any wear or overheating, remember to tell Reiner. He'll help you apply lubrication and adjust the tightness." As Dallin seemed to be listening to Harvey's incessant and careful instructions, but he also seemed distracted. He walked back and forth a few times in the workshop to adjust his balance and gait rhythm. Then he quickly walked to the laboratory door and, with a hint of anxiety, opened it. The winter sun poured into the room like a tide, its golden glow instantly engulfing Arslan, who stood in the doorway. The brass-colored body of his alchemical prosthetic shone in the sunlight. "This is the first time I've seen the sun." The hybrid turned to look at Harvey and Reiner standing in the room. Deep crimson soul fire flickered softly in his dark eye sockets. Chapter 31, The Fragile Humanity of Alchemical Life. After returning to Grizzly Castle, Geoffrey remained hidden in his tavern room, daring not to leave. Although he hadn't personally participated in the attack, invading a spellcaster's private property and attempting to harm or even kill them, even as an accessory, was a crime worthy of years in chains and a cold, damp prison. He suspected the Union hadn't immediately apprehended him because the necromancer hadn't yet shifted his focus from the attacker, whom he had killed on the spot, to him. Fortunately, the necromancer had adhered to the Union's laws and hadn't considered killing him outright. Another spellcaster might not have been so lucky. A spellcaster whose private property was invaded and whose personal safety was threatened had the right to retaliate at any rate, even against ordinary civilians. Geoffrey paced anxiously in his room, hesitating between fleeing to the countryside to be with his sister or turning himself into the Union. The sound of knocks on the door frightened him so much that his whole body trembled and his legs went weak. Who would knock on the door in the middle of the night? Was it the Union coming to arrest him? Or was it the necromancer coming to lynch him and take revenge? Geoffrey's teeth chattered. He tried hard to control the urge to jump out the window and escape, and walked slowly to the door. "Who are you?" The man was wearing a half-new short hunting suit, with the hood pulled down slightly to cover his face. In the dim light of the tavern, his specific appearance could not be seen clearly, only that his face looked pale and bloodless. The other party did not seem to be carrying any weapons, which made Geoffrey feel a little better. "Lord Harvey has decided to spare your life," he whispered, "but you need to provide 2 pieces of testimony." Geoffrey was stunned for a moment, then mumbled, What testimony? I've already told Master Harvey everything, the testimony of Union investigator Burko Conrad, who tricked you into falsely accusing Master Harvey, and the testimony of your conspiracy with the church's deacon, Stanny Kane, to harm spellcasters." The man swooped into the room, pulled out a crystal-clear magic stone, and pointed it at Geoffrey, who sat in the chair. "This is the image recording magic stone. You will repeat your accusations as I direct." Geoffrey obediently obeyed, not daring to resist. "Come with me out of the city. I'll give you some money and send you to the countryside. When winter is over, take the money and leave St. Valen. Don't return to Jackdaw Town." Geoffrey was delighted. He hadn't expected that Master Harvey would not only not pursue his crimes but would offer him money, all on the condition that he not return to Jackdaw Town. Despite feeling a bit incredulous, he obediently packed his belongings and followed the visitor out of the city, turning onto a rugged path that led up a small hill. Under the bright moonlight, he trudged along the mountain path, footsteps deep and shallow. "Sir, where are you taking me?" That money," He finally couldn't help but ask, worried that he wouldn't receive the promised deportation fee. Then I'll take you here. Go straight up this mountain road. There's a village where you can stay for the night. The man in front turned, pulled a small purse from his pocket, and tossed it into Jeffrey's hands. Jeffrey caught the purse, feeling it heavy in his hand. Suppressing his ecstasy, he lowered his head to open it and count the amount. Suddenly, he felt a gust of mountain wind, and before he could look up, he felt a cold hand gently pinch his neck. Crack! Jeffrey's eyes widened, and with a brief groan, he fell face-first to the ground. The tightly gripped purse loosened, and the coins inside scattering to the ground. It wasn't just gold pounds, there were also a fair amount of silver and copper coins interspersed. Back so soon, Reiner, standing on a ladder, carefully performing routine maintenance on Unit 00, looked at Hunter Pierce, who had just returned to the manor, with some surprise. The hunter stamped his foot, shaking off the mud on his boots, then fetched a piece of cotton cloth and carefully wiped the dust off. These were new boots given to him by Lord Harvey. Hand-sewn from reindeer hide, they were said to come from the Alchemist Guild of Danius, the Mage Kingdom. They were waterproof and were resistant, the kind of fine goods only aristocrats could afford. Of course, I don't want to travel during the day. The nasty sun will burn my skin. After undergoing a blood transfusion, Pierce was now essentially a hybrid. While his thirst for blood wasn't as intense as a pure-blooded vampire, his aversion to sunlight was instinctive. Running at full speed on his own two legs, he could be just as fast as a horse, so he volunteered to help Reiner with the trip. The round trip would only take him half the night. He didn't need to sleep at night anyway. Reiner put down his tools and was silent for a moment before mumbling, "Have you delivered the money yet?" Pierce closed the door to the experimental workshop and replied casually in a low voice, "I have, but Reiner, to be honest, I feel you're being a little unfair to the master by doing this. Don't forget, the master saved our lives," he reminded him, frowning. "Especially you. Think about the suffering you endured when you contracted the cold plague. And now? The master not only saved you, but also allowed you to learn to read and learn magic with Mr. Asdalin. I couldn't even imagine such treatment." The hunter finished styling his boots, dropped the cotton cloth, and looked at Reiner with a hint of complaint. Reiner froze for a moment, then feebly argued, I know this is a little unfair to you, sir, but he's my son, Pierce." He pulled a charging line through his body, then slowly sat down, leaning against the alchemical instrument. "Since you were so soft-hearted and let him go, and never mentioned it to me afterwards, never blamed me at all. I just hope he can live a peaceful life in the future. That money is all from making little gadgets in my free time using the scraps you discarded, selling them to the merchants who deliver to the manor every week, a pitiful parental love. I've already sent him away. I'll keep it a secret this time, but it won't happen again." Pierce sighed, but inwardly he said, "I'm sorry, my friend. I must carry out Master Harvey's mission." Harvey and Asdalin walked side by side, along the manor wall, strolling and chatting in the orchard. "Is this what you call the humanity of alchemical life?" Asdalin was puzzled, not quite understanding Harvey's intentions. "Wizards differ from ordinary humans, possessing power, knowledge, and longevity unattainable by ordinary humans. Technically, they should be considered transcendental beings in terms of their life force. The things wizards create with their knowledge and magic, whether puppets, zombies, or alchemical servants, are essentially mere tools and vassals, receiving little attention. Harvey, however, is distinctly different. He isn't interested in transforming zombies or creating zombies, but instead has a special fascination with sophisticated alchemical instruments. If it weren't for the cellar overflowing with fell or corpses, he would have mistaken him for a brilliant alchemist. He also pays particular attention to his experimental creation, the alchemical creature named Reiner, treating it neither as a servant nor a weapon. Their daily interactions resemble those of employer and subordinate, teacher and student. "You don't understand, Asdalin. I do this for two reasons," Harvey patiently explained, anticipating his bewilderment. "Reiner is my first successful alchemical life form, but he's more than just an experimental creation. I believe any object that carries a human soul should be treated as a real person. Only in this way can I solidify my cognition, maintain my humanity, and avoid being lost in the extraordinary knowledge and power." Asdalin nodded, half comprehending. He had indeed heard of many high-level wizards, even legendary spellcasters, who suffered backlash from their excessive obsession with the endless knowledge and extraordinary power brought by magic. but you're just a junior mage. Do you need to start considering these issues so early? As Dallin could only secretly grumble these words in his heart. Chapter 32 Mysterious Beetles and Derived Ores. Harvey suddenly remembered something and turned to look at Asdalin. By the way, when we rescued you from the ancient wizard ruins, what did you mean by that nest? Those were the strange creatures I discovered during my rare awakenings. Asdalin's eyes flickered with crimson soulfire, as if he was trying to recall. A strange kind of beetle often appears in the wizard ruins. There are so many of them, it seems like they're emerging from the ground. At first, I thought they were just ordinary social insects, until I discovered they were targeting the magic stones stored in the wizard's tower. Those beetles are frantically searching for items and minerals rich in magical energy, even those alchemical potions in bottles and jars. Anything with a hint of magic energy as their target. He squatted down, picked up a round pebble, and handed it to the bewildered Harvey. After consuming the magical energy, those insects immediately made and lay eggs, then quickly die, gradually transforming into metallic, pebbled spheres. Harvey froze, suddenly remembering the metal pebbles he'd scraped from the ceiling of the ancient mage ruins. Wait! Follow me. He hurried back to the study, dragging Asdarin along, and showed him the bag of pebbles, nearly forgotten in the warehouse. Yes, that's what those insects transform into after death. As for how they ended up embedded in the ceiling of the mage tower, I have no idea, Asdarin replied affirmatively. Harvey dumped all 7 or 8 beetle pebbles from the bag onto the desk. I've tried burning it with flame, corroding it with acid, and having Reiner cut it with a wire saw, but nothing can destroy it. I initially thought it was some undiscovered, extremely dense, hard mineral. I didn't expect it to be transformed from a living beetle. Harvey felt that perhaps his knowledge was too limited. He would try to get guidance from the knowledgeable high-level spellcasters at the next forum exchange. As Dallin picked up a pebble with his metal palm and tossed it around casually, an idea suddenly flashed through his mind, and he suggested hesitantly, since it's transformed from a living organism, perhaps we can try to analyze it using the same living matter. Living matter? Harvey fell into deep thought after hearing Asdalin's suggestion. At night, the spacious experimental workshop was brightly lit. Harvey illuminated all the illuminating magic stones hanging from the ceiling. Sir, this strange stone seems completely useless. Why do you insist on dismantling it? Reiner repeatedly switched between welding torches, wire saws, grinding wheels, and other tools, all to no avail. The grinding wheel even broke into several pieces from the excessive force while grinding and cutting the beetle ore, nearly leaving an unsightly scratch on his prosthetics. Harvey, wearing a metal mask with hardened crystal lenses for eyes, spoke in a muffled voice. This beetle feeds on magical energy. Its products inevitably carry a certain amount of residual magical energy. Strictly speaking, it's also a magical material, but its function is unknown. Anything unknown is worthy of further study. Harvey arranged for Reiner and himself to work at the metal lab bench, while Asdalin observed from the side to prevent any emergencies. As for Pierce, nighttime was his normal activity, and he preferred to patrol the perimeter of the manor, capturing small animals and collecting some fresh blood as a reward. Harvey used Reiner's pipe clamp to secure the beetle ore to the metal table to prevent it from rolling during the experiment. Then, from a row of glass test tubes, he pulled one half filled with a pale yellow liquid. This was an alchemical material native to the Misty Mountains, extracted from the trunks of mutated golden trees. Rich in life energy, it was a key ingredient in many nature-based spells. He used the dropper to scoop up a few drops and carefully drip them onto the surface of the beetle ore. The liquid slid down gently like grease, leaving no trace and no reaction. He immediately replaced the beetle ore with a new one and drew a new tube of plant extract, also containing a nature-based spell material. Still no reaction. He cleaned the ore and replaced it again. Half an hour passed, and after trying every ingredient in the row of glass test tubes, nothing worked. As Dallin stood beside the laboratory table, feeling like he would have yawned and fallen asleep if he hadn't already transformed into an alchemical being, Harvey and Reiner remained enthusiastic, one operating, the other assisting, skillfully and fluidly switching between experimental materials. A true natural-born research-oriented spellcaster. Harvey removed his metal mask and breathed a sigh of relief, then wiped the sweat from his brow with the soft towel Reiner offered. Natural magic materials were completely ineffective, at least with a dozen or so he currently had. Was it because the materials were too low grade, lacking sufficient magical energy? What if, during the experiment, They used Unit Zero's energy gathering device to connect the beetle ore and directly feed it with pure magic energy extracted from the ley line. Even magical science experiments could incorporate a catalyst. Thinking of this, Harvey decided to give it a try, right away. He had Reiner guide a thin charging tube and securely hold the beetle ore with a bracket engraved with inscriptions. These inscriptions would instantly transfer the vast ley line's energy during charging, creating the same effect as the inscriptions on Reiner and Asdalan's alchemical prostheses. Experimentation continues. Reiner activated Unit Zero's focused energy mode, adjusting its output frequency to his usual charging intensity. Harvey put on his mask again and observed the beetle ore, which was locked to its bracket. Sure enough, as the ore was fed with the energy from the magic network, it vibrated slightly. Its metallic surface gradually became transparent, revealing a strange, liquid-like flow within. It wasn't a purely solid state. Harvey observed it closely and found that the ore's reaction was limited to this point, with no further discoveries. Reiner, increase the output frequency, increase it further, not enough. I want to see the specific reactions within the ore. Reiner gripped Unit Zero's brass control handle tightly and warned with some concern, "Sir, no more. The instrument is about to overload. Use the cooling device to temporarily cool it down and maintain the energy output," Harvey ordered without even looking up. Reiner frantically pulled another lever, and several brackets holding the frozen magic stones rose, fitting tightly against the brass cylinder of Unit Zero. Push one notch higher. The liquid inside the ore is accelerating, Harvey quickly commanded. Reiner could only pull the handle again, a grimace on his face. Unit Zero's fierce humming echoed throughout the laboratory, its entire body vibrating slightly. Under this massive influx of magical energy, the beetle ore finally underwent the transformation Harvey had hoped for. The liquid material that had been flowing slowly within it rapidly dissipated, and the entire ore suddenly erupted in a dazzling light as bright as daylight. Harvey instinctively closed his eyes, hearing only the simultaneous warnings of Reiner and Asdalan. "Be careful, sir, be careful." A violent explosion was followed by a loud bang, and Harvey felt himself being crushed head-on by a tremendous force. "It's over. I'm dead," was the only thought in his mind. When he finally opened his eyes, he discovered his mask had shattered and vanished. Two massive alchemical prostheses pressed against him, their broad metal breastplates covering his fragile chest and head. Hiss. He felt as if his ribs had been crushed. "My lord. Are you all right?" Reiner and Asdalan quickly rose and began to examine Harvey. "Strange? Such a violent explosion, why didn't it kill me instantly? At the very least, I should have been missing a few limbs, right?" Harvey felt his body. He'd been facing the explosion at close range, yet apart from a dull ache in his ribs from the pressure of the two alchemical freaks, there wasn't a single sign of injury. Son of Fire, Verholden, sat before the magic brain, his fingers dancing with excitement, rapidly typing away on the keyboard. He and the Frost Giant had been engaged in a 3-hour friendly discussion regarding a research project involving the analysis of rare spellcasting materials. Although the entire academic exchange was filled with non-special terms such as shit, idiot, and retarded bastard, overall, Fair felt that he still had the upper hand. He was planning to transmit a final summary message, and then attach some emotional venting words to end this virtual magic battle that made him proud tonight. Suddenly, he found that the inscriptions on the base of the magic brain instrument, which was originally functioning normally, suddenly went out, and the mercury tadpoles used to form the text on the crystal plate that displayed the content information also dissipated and disappeared. Huh? What's going on? The high-level spellcaster was stunned. All the content I just racked my brains to write, was it written in vain? Chapter 33 Unprecedented Energy Carrier. Harvey, clutching his ribs, aching from the pressure of two alchemical prostheses, walked over to the lab table, shattered by the blast. The beetle ore, which had exploded due to overcharging, was gone, seemingly reduced to ash. How could such a powerful explosion cause no harm to a human body? Harvey muttered to himself, puzzled, as he picked up the blown-away bracket. Could it be that this energy came from the magical weave, and was absorbed by it during release? Experimenting with unknown magical materials shouldn't be rushed. Surviving such a suicidal act was pure luck. Such good fortune might not return. More research casters die each year in their own frenzied experiments than battle mages on the demonic battlefields of the Evil Moon Mountains. It's better to stick to the alchemical reagents in the test tubes and conduct contact analysis experiments one by one. After all, the exhaustive method is theoretically the safest in any experimental field. As long as those witch hunters from the church stopped bothering him, time was the least valuable commodity for Harvey. Pierce, with his keen hearing, was drawn to the explosion from afar and quickly rushed back to the lab to investigate. As Dallin, looking at the pale, bloodless face of the newly minted vampire, suddenly had a fantastic idea. "Harvey, how about trying vampire blood? It's the ultimate spellcasting ingredient." Harvey then remembered that vampire blood, as described in many magical texts, is essential for casting high-level spells. It's even rumored that some legendary forbidden spells require a certain amount of vampire blood for auxiliary casting or guidance, the only difference being that it requires higher quality, higher-grade vampire blood. Pierce, also hearing Asdalin's suggestion, paused for a moment before decisively rolling up his sleeves. "Sir, how much do you need?" Before Harvey could reply, Asdalin reached out and pressed Pierce's shoulder. With the tone of a senior disciplining a newborn, he chided with a hint of disdain. "Did you go and collect the blood of those disgusting animals again today?" Pierce paused, then lowered his head and muttered, "Oh, just a couple of weasels, Mr. Asdalin. I told you, don't keep collecting the blood of animals that live in the dirt and sewers. If you have a problem with drinking human blood, go hunt some reindeer or antelope. Don't be a predator, and definitely not a scavenger." The hunter nodded repeatedly, indicating he'd taken note. He seemed still unaccustomed to his vampire identity, settling for whatever he could find, unwilling to specifically collect the blood of large animals, which would make his life seem so different from Harvey and Reiner's. Harvey was also pleased to see that Pierce's self-awareness remained at the level of a human, unlike Arstalin, who deliberately lectured him on the history, traditions, and cultural customs of the vampire race. After drawing several dozen milliliters of blood from Pierce, Harvey carefully divided it into several portions and placed them in glass test tubes. Fortunately, he wasn't short of money at the moment. Selling Pierce's blood on a forum seemed unethical to Harvey. However, saving some of the blood for future magical research was a good idea. Such high-level spellcasting materials were extremely rare, even in a lab. After briefly cleaning up the mess from the failed experiment, Harvey immediately began preparing for a new round of experiments. This time, he planned to use vampire blood to analyze the fused beetle or fearing another explosion. Reiner refused to let Harvey handle the work himself. He volunteered to don the useless lab mask and stood at the lab bench. "You've got the airs of a research wizard," as Dallin mocked a crisp whistle, teasing Reiner and slightly easing the tension. As planned, Harvey was to stand 5 meters from the lab bench. As Dallin stood in front of him, completely shielding him from view. Using only his reconnaissance eye spell, he could observe and guide Reiner from close range. "Pierce, restart the energy focusing device." The hunter nodded, pulled the lever, and reignited Unit 0, which had momentarily shut down due to an energy overload. Harvey could only silently pray that the forum members weren't sharing any important knowledge in the middle of the night, as this sudden server reboot might cause them to lose connection and collapse. Reiner, shifting into work mode, seemed to have completely discarded all the negative emotions of his humanity. His metal-cast arms and hands operated with stability, and his observation of the energy transmission was extremely precise and sharp. He quickly kept the beetle hour's charge at a sensitive level of sufficient but not excessive. He then picked up the test tube containing Pierce's blood and used the dropper to siphon a small amount, dropping it onto the surface of the beetle ore, which was undergoing a violent reaction. At that moment, a strange transformation occurred. The ore instantly absorbed all the vampire blood that dripped onto its surface, and the material inside, which had previously flowed like a liquid, instantly solidified and stopped. Seconds later, the ore's outer shell crumbled away like weathering, revealing an amber-colored gaseous substance within. However, this substance did not dissipate like air. Instead, it remained condensed, hovering above the fixed support like a microscopic cloud. Reiner was stunned. What is this? It looks like a ball of cotton." He instinctively reached out his fingers, made of metal and bone, to gently touch and sense its shape. Harvey, from a distance, using his reconnaissance technique, had no time to stop his dangerous move. "Stop. Reiner, don't touch." The moment the microscopic cloud made contact with Reiner's fingertips, it seemed to come alive, rapidly flowing through his fingertips and into his body. From his palms to his forearms, then to his shoulders, his chest, finally converging at his head. The energy mass seemed to spread upward along Reiner's body with its own consciousness. Everywhere it passed, The alchemical inscriptions engraved upon them instantly illuminated, bursting with a light far more intense than ever before. In the eye sockets of Reiner's metal skull, the once flickering blue soul fire instantly turned blazing white, forming a miniature yet rapidly rotating vortex. The inscriptions across his entire alchemical torso illuminated, maintaining an unprecedented, constant glow. Reiner felt a strange, immense energy rapidly gathering within his eyes, threatening to burst through his body. Unable to utter a single word, he could only twist his neck with difficulty, raising his head to gaze at the ceiling festooned with pipes. The next moment, the others saw two beams of blazing light burst forth from Reiner's eyes. The pillars of light pierced the ceiling of the experimental workshop and shot towards the dark night sky at a speed undetectable to the naked eye. Pierce rushed to Reiner's side, lifting him from his knees. Everyone stared at the massive, perfectly shaped hole in the ceiling, speechless for a moment. Reiner glanced blankly at the stunned crowd and whispered awkwardly, "The moon is so round today." In the wizard kingdom of Duas, a high-level spellcaster tumbled from his chair, pale as a limp. He scrambled to his feet, a look of terror on his face, and scurried off to a room higher up in the mage tower. "Teacher, I just detected an unknown magical energy in the magic net," he breathlessly shouted to the elderly man meditating on the couch. "That incredibly massive energy surge just brushed past my positioning magic pattern." He was still terrified, muttering in fear. "It was so close to shattering my magic pattern. Secret be upon me. I almost died." The old man, awake from his meditation, frowned and scolded sternly. "I told you long ago, with your current abilities, don't try to roam the magic network lightly. It's too dangerous. You could die at any moment." Chapter 34 Face-to-Face Complaint. The winter in Jackdaw Town passed peacefully. The fierce and arduous battle to defend the manor that Harvey had anticipated never occurred. Pierce and his alchemical beasts patrolled the mountain's border daily, but aside from the migrating beasts, not a single demonic orc appeared. Arstalin and Reiner returned to the ancient wizard's ruins once more, carefully searching for more beetle ore scattered within the pits. After repeated testing, Harvey had a rough idea of the purpose of this strange substance. It was a highly powerful carrier of compressed magical energy, similar to a nuclear battery. He believed that this energy carrier could not only be loaded onto an alchemical prosthesis, allowing Reiner to unleash energy blasts similar to the mystic eyes of death to directly penetrate and obliterate targets. This energy could even transcend the dimensional barrier between reality and the magical network, achieving cross-dimensional attacks without the need for a magic matrix. It was a pity that the demonic orcs had not returned to Jackdaw Ridge since their retreat, otherwise, Harvey would not have minded using them as targets for his firepower tests. Shortly after the snow melted, officials from the church and the Union were the first to return to Jackdaw Town. Magical Inspector Bulko Conrad had just arrived. From afar, he spotted Harvey, waiting at the Union branch gate with his alchemical golem, a skeletal piece of bone and metal. "Ah, Mage Harvey, I heard you didn't evacuate this winter." The slightly balding spellcaster, Donnie, was the first to greet him. Harvey smiled and nodded. "Yes, I'm lucky the orcs haven't crossed the mountains this winter." Bulko frowned slightly, his eyes tinged with distaste as he glanced at the two of them. Without a word, he passed them and prepared to enter the hall. "Wait, Mr. Bulko," Harvey called out. The inspector stopped and turned back, his expression growing increasingly impatient. "Mr. Bulko, I think you may have forgotten about that incident before winter when you entered my manor to investigate." Harvey, unfazed, pulled a thin document from his pocket and handed it to Donnie, who was standing nearby. "This is the complaint I submitted to the Union," he explained calmly. The slightly balding Donnie was a bit surprised, smoothing his thinning hair down his forehead before politely opening the document and reading it. This is, you want to file a complaint against Mr. Burko." Donnie glanced at it briefly before looking at Burko awkwardly. "Yes, I believe this direct accusation, made without prior investigation, not only violates the Union's rules of conduct but also tarnishes my reputation." He glanced around at the Union branch members standing around, his tone growing more serious. "And, if I remember correctly, when Mr. Burko came to investigate me, he didn't present a relevant investigation permit, right?" Everyone in the Union froze at this, their eyes instinctively turning to Burko, who stood at the door with a sullen expression. "No, that shouldn't be the case. I've never been involved in this investigation," Donnie, who was in charge of reviewing magical affairs, muttered. He knew Burko was probably planning to act first and report later, But he couldn't bring himself to expose his colleague in person. You may not know, but just a week ago, regarding the investigation into the magical experiment involving civilians, it was Mr. Burko who identified the victim's family member, Mr. Jeffrey. Harvey paused before continuing. They actually conspired with a church deacon to invade my manor laboratory and attempt to attack and kill me. He pulled out a recording stone and gently tossed it into Donnie's hands. This is footage of Mr. Burko's visit, the day of the attack, and Mr. Jeffrey's testimony. Harvey had deliberately edited the footage, eliminating the scenes of Reiner and the others' counterattack and leaving only the scenes of Stanley and Jeffrey invading the laboratory and launching the initial attack. An elderly spellcaster standing beside Donnie snatched the stone and quickly activated it, releasing a light and shadow image. Everyone examined the grainy footage with a solemn expression. Church scum. I knew these hypocrites, appearing benevolent on the surface, were secretly eyeing us, someone muttered, gritting their teeth. Despite the numerous factions and constant internal strife within the Union, when it comes to the long-standing conflict with the Church, they always choose to unite and confront it. This is because everyone is a spellcaster, once considered a heretic and blasphemous wizard by the Church, the kind who deserve to be burned at the stake. Especially in areas like St. Valen, where the Union's influence is weak, it's almost true that every long-standing wizarding family has a member who has fallen at the hands of the Church's witch hunters. This centuries-old feud cannot be easily erased by a brief truce or peace agreement. Burko's face was ashen as he looked at the crowd around him, each of them staring at him with serious and complex eyes. You suspect I'm colluding with the Church to attack a fellow spellcaster? He uttered the words through gritted teeth. The impatient elderly spellcaster stepped forward. We don't want to make a judgment, Burko, but you need to explain to the Union's higher-ups. As he spoke, he raised his hand slightly, faintly emitting waves of magical energy. This was a battle mage capable of instant spellcasting. In his youth, he had fought demons head-on in the Evil Moon Mountains, and had only recently returned to his hometown of St. Valen nearing retirement. I didn't conspire with the Church. This is a slander against me. Burko suppressed the tremor in his voice. You're going to attack me, Mr. Joyce, based on the testimony of a lowly necromancer, even though I haven't been convicted yet. Battles between spellcasters of the same level often hinge not on spell power but on speed. He was merely a research caster, no way could he defeat Joyce, a former battle mage. Watch your words, Burko Conrad. The Union requires no discrimination against spellcasters of any faction. The old mage didn't relax his focus. He simply signaled with his eyes to his colleagues, and two of them immediately approached Burko, forming a subtle, coercive posture. I want you to go to headquarters and cooperate with the investigation. The Union's highest security principle was to catch any possible traitor. Donnie stood beside Harvey, watching Burko, his face drooping as he was escorted away by the crowd, and sighed with regret. Mr. Burko, ruined by his prejudice and discrimination. Master Harvey, the matter hasn't been concluded yet, so there's no need for you to accompany us to Dalius to cooperate with the investigation. The Union didn't have an investigative headquarters in St. Valen. The nearest investigative agency was in the neighboring country of Dalius. Harvey nodded in understanding. He didn't expect an accusation of this magnitude to directly charge Burko with a serious crime of treason. At most, he would be given a lesson and transferred out of Jackdaw Town. More importantly, we must lodge a solemn protest with the Church, urging them to thoroughly investigate this matter and identify those stubborn divine punishment witch hunters. Harvey noticed that several spellcasters who had been temporarily assigned to negotiate had already stormed off to the Church without even entering the branch office. Donnie patted Harvey's shoulder and offered a somewhat embarrassed comfort. Don't worry, once the matter is thoroughly investigated, the Federation will definitely compensate you for all the losses you have suffered in terms of reputation and personal integrity. If you are listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means it was downloaded and re-uploaded without effort. We warmly invite you to visit our channel, Fanfic World. There you will find the original version of this story and many other novels of various genres. We look forward to seeing you dive into a world of incredible novels. Chapter 35 Online discussions triggered by internet outage. It was night, and it wasn't even time for bed yet. Harvey yawned as he forced himself to sit down in front of the magic brain instrument. The various delays had completely disrupted his biological clock. First, he worried about the return of the evil orcs, then he'd been busy all night preparing for Arstelin's affairs. And then there was the sudden witch hunter attack. No sleep during the day, suffering at night, Harvey muttered to himself, pinching his aching brow. He'd long maintained a disciplined routine of resting and relaxing during the day, meditating and working at night. Now, he'd switched to a two-shift system, tutoring Pierce and Reiner with Arstelin during the day, and conducting beetle ore experiments with Reiner at night. But they're all alchemical beings who can recharge with energy. While I'm relying solely on my physical body, why don't I just complete my alchemical transformation myself? Harvey slapped his head. No. Stop. Stop this dangerous thought. Experimental research is for entrepreneurial projects. Entrepreneurial projects are for getting rich quickly, and the ultimate goal of getting rich is to enjoy life. Looking at the crystal plate of the magic brain instrument before him, reflecting his pale face with dark circles under his eyes, Harvey couldn't help but sigh silently. I need to find some alchemical potions to improve my physical condition. Research casters are too weak, of course. If they successfully advance to intermediate spellcasters, their physical fitness will be transformed to a certain extent by the magic network energy, but the advancement of research casters depends on the amount of knowledge they acquire and their study of the spell matrix. This is far more difficult than the advancement of combat casters. After gathering his wandering thoughts, Harvey tapped a button and entered his forum username into the magic brain, successfully entering the spellcaster forum. The usernames of the various forum members on the crystal plate lit up one by one as the time approached. Elemental Hand, good evening, everyone. Frost Giant, good evening, everyone. At Mr. Son of Flame, after tonight's exchange meeting, would you be willing to continue discussing our previous research questions in depth? Harvey covered his face speechlessly. These two had been the most active communications on the forum lately, but the content of their exchanges was filled with heated arguments, so heated that even Harvey, attempting to peek in and plagiarize, found it difficult to bear. Flameson, of course. My pleasure. By the way, I'd like to ask the administrator if the sudden communication interruption on the forum last time was related to the unusual phenomena with the ley line during that period. Frost Giant, I have the same question. There was a sudden powerful energy surge in the ley line. I was roaming at the time and was almost affected to some extent. Scorching Lord, Mr. Turing doesn't seem to be around tonight. I'm afraid someone like him wouldn't be interested in listening in on discussions of this magnitude. Harvey couldn't suppress a smirk. The forum members didn't know that the main reason he logged in invisible during each discussion was because he was afraid they would throw out a random question that would hide a hole in his knowledge. A junior high student pretending to be a doctoral advisor in front of a group of graduate students and doctoral graduates had to be very cautious. The most important thing to maintain your prestige is to never forget the wise saying, too much talk leads to mistakes. Scorching Overlord, therefore, we recommend that everyone refrain from attempting to roam the ley line for the time being. If you are affected by that unusual energy wave, your life could be in danger. Harvey hadn't attempted to roam the ley line recently, so he wasn't entirely sure what the unusual fluctuations they were talking about were. He only vaguely suspected that it might be related to the pure, massive energy shockwave that Reiner had unintentionally unleashed while researching the beetle ore. After all, that energy shockwave was indeed observed, piercing through the spatial plane and exiting reality into the higher dimensional ley line space. I didn't expect this energy shockwave to be so dangerous. It almost accidentally injured a forum member, Harvey thought to himself. It seemed he would have to proceed with caution in future experiments. At this thought, an idea struck him, and he raised his hand to type a message. Kilthuzid, did anyone observe what happened to that energy wave? Kilthuzid, did it dissipate within the ley line? Or did it strike something? I'm willing to pay a certain amount of points to obtain the data from this observation. Actually, this question would be best addressed directly to Mr. Scorching Lord, the suspected legendary spellcaster, but Harvey suspects he's not interested in a simple point reward. After all, this profoundly knowledgeable man has primarily served as a knowledge provider on the forum, assisting members with their research and spellcasting, and has accumulated the most points. There's not much to offer him in exchange, and he's definitely not short of points. Elemental Hand, when the energy shock occurred, I immediately sensed danger and left the ley line space, so I didn't observe any useful information. Flameson, I was exchanging knowledge with Mr. Frost Giant. After the abnormal fluctuations occurred, the forum immediately lost communication and didn't resume until 2 hours later. Man in the mirror, indeed, I had a material in the process of being transferred, and the ley line fluctuations affected the transfer, causing it to be damaged during transmission. At Mr. Forest Heart, rest assured, I'll send you a replacement of the same quality later. I'll cover the loss personally. Harvey covered his face in guilt. Sure enough, this mess had impacted his express delivery business. Luckily, his customers were quite conscious, lacking the consumer-first mentality. Otherwise, he wouldn't have been able to afford the compensation. Heart of the forest, this is the price to pay for enjoying such convenient technology. I understand. The group discussed the anomaly in the magical network for a while. Harvey noticed that Mr. Scorching Overlord hadn't commented on the observation results. It seemed he couldn't do anything about it. However, once he became more proficient in utilizing the energy of the beetle ore, he could find a way to facilitate an observation experiment, involving this group of knowledgeable and powerful high-level spellcasters, providing him with ample experimental advice and observational data. The 1-hour forum discussion quickly drew to a close. The Merriman Quinn brothers were about to exit the forum, still unsatisfied, to record and organize the day's discussions. Suddenly, they saw personal communication on the crystal board of their magic brain from the wild alchemist they had anonymously funded. Kilthuzid, Mr. Mirror Man, are you still online? Man in the mirror, yes. Have you made any progress in your research recently? If you need anything, please let me know. I'll do my best to help. Harvey couldn't help but sigh. This man in the mirror was truly kind and generous. Why couldn't he meet someone like him in real life, someone so willing to help him, like a mentor, with all his heart? He then thought that his real identity was just a necromancer, and not being discriminated against was already a blessing. It was better to be anonymous online. Kilthuzid, may I ask if you have any connection or partnership with the alchemical quest? I'd like to use you to purchase a batch of discarded alchemical prosthetics from the quest, any model or function. Kilthuzid, of course. Feel free to name the price, and we can discuss it slowly. The Quinn brothers were both stunned when they saw the message. Isn't he conducting experiments on the transmutation of life? Why is he purchasing discarded prosthetics? What good would all this scrap be? Wouldn't it just be sold to the burrow dwarves to be recast into inferior alloys? Offord seemed to have a thought inside with sympathy. He might be really short on funds and want to use scrapped prosthetics instead of finished ones for his experiments. Wouldn't that significantly reduce the effectiveness? It would ruin his experimental progress. Ed frowned. The chief alchemist stood up and walked to the window, muttering to himself with some emotion. Alice, the path to truth for wild alchemists is so difficult. Ed, think about those early days when we first started in this industry. Sign a note to the apprentice in charge of the scrap processing center and have them sort out a batch of good quality scrap parts and pass them on to Mr. Kilthuzid. Chapter 36 Relocation Plan, Heading into the Wasteland. When Harvey woke up this morning, he found Reiner fidgeting at the door. Reiner, what's wrong? What went wrong in the lab? Ever since they began researching the versatile properties of beetle ore, Harvey and Reiner had often struggled to precisely control the catalytic reaction, leading to various experimental accidents. Strangely, whether released as explosions or energy waves, the beetle ore had never harmed Harvey himself. Even when exposed to the incident at close range, he remained unscathed. But Reiner and Asdalen were different. Although the alloys used in the alchemical prosthetics produced by the Exploration Society, both the scrapped and auxiliary models, were top-notch, they wouldn't be shattered beyond repair in an accident. However, during yesterday's experiment, Pierce had climbed onto the lab roof to retrieve one of Reiner's arms. The lab wasn't so lucky. After Reiner, equipped with a beetle ore, indiscriminately unleashed his mystic eyes of death, the room was riddled with holes, its ceiling patched and its walls leaking. No, sir, Reiner explained bitterly. For some reason, the teleportation array has been constantly activated since last night, and a mountain of scrapped alchemical prosthetic parts has been pouring out. Reiner, who was on night duty that night, was startled, thinking someone was using the array to discard alchemical waste. Harvey laughed heartily. Those were the materials I ordered, not scrap. No wonder Mr. Asdalen said so too. He's already started sorting that pile of materials. Besides training the newly converted hybrid Pierce as a descendant of his own race, Asdalen's favorite pastime was spending time in Harvey's study, reading books on continental history and participating in all the experiments taking place in the experimental workshop. The ancient wizard's passion for history and knowledge was perfectly embodied in him. Harvey donned his robes and dragged Reiner downstairs. Let's go help Asdalen sort through the pieces. Although most of these alchemical parts are damaged and scrapped, the alloy used in their casting is of very high quality, Asdalen commented as he sorted them. Perhaps we can try to put together a new set of prosthetics, replacing Reiner with one that's stronger and uses less energy. Harvey squatted on the ground, identifying and sorting the pile of parts that had almost formed a mountain. I still don't understand what the use of all this junk is. Pierce, relying on his hybrid's immense strength, carried the loads back and forth, lifting over 100 kilograms of alloy scrap at a time. My lord, if you want to make alloy weapons, Reiner and I can go to Grizzly Castle and steal some from the Lord's armory. At night, the vampire's stealth abilities were truly exceptional. Harvey shook his head and laughed. Do you think there aren't any spellcasters from the Federation in Grizzleberg? You and Reiner, one a vampire and the other an alchemical being, are simply destined for the stake. These alchemical scraps, purchased in bulk at a fraction of the price from MR Mirror Man, will serve as crucial soul carriers for Harvey's future army of soul alchemy beasts. Ever since the witch hunter attack, Harvey has been considering relocating his laboratory away from Jackdaw Town. On the one hand, besides Reiner, he now has two forbidden non-human companions, as Dallin and Pierce. The risk of exposure increases dramatically. And he worries daily about a joint visit from the Federation and the Church to inspect his water meter. On the other hand, although he has vigorously filed a countersuit against the spellcaster Burko, who discriminated against him, there's a high probability that he will be dismissed or transferred from Jackdaw Town. However, there are many factions within the Federation that discriminate against necromancers, and he fears that Burko's case will provoke more powerful opponents to attack him. The witch hunter issue, coupled with the fact that it would undoubtedly exacerbate the long-standing conflict between the Union and the Church, would draw too much attention to himself as the trigger for the conflict. Therefore, the best option was to stay away from Jackdaw Town, a place poised to become a hotbed of controversy. Harvey had already considered his relocation destination. It was to the north of Jackdaw Ridge, the location of the ancient Mage ruins. Not only was it remote, but it also lay outside the borders of St. Valen, leaving neither the Union nor the Church with jurisdiction. Simply applying for a pioneering order from the Lord allowed them to openly occupy the land, and after 10 years of operation, ownership would be officially theirs. Furthermore, the ruins held something Harvey coveted, a strange beetle he named the Energy Absorber, and the energy ore derived. Such a vast, pure source of natural energy, a renewable resource that could be reproduced by the beetles, was a treasure trove for any spellcaster. With energy ore, the energy problem was solved, meaning he had access to a vast supply of soul alchemy beasts. Harvey's plan to mass-produce alchemy lifeforms could finally take shape. After all, the current Unit 0 energy gathering array, besides maintaining the magic net form and express delivery services, also had to provide energy for Reiner and Asdellin, and was already at a critical point in its supply. The 10 previously transformed wolf spider alchemy beasts hadn't had enough energy to supply them, and relying solely on Harvey's physical body wouldn't have been enough. Otherwise, he wouldn't have been caught off guard during the witch hunter attack, which caught Pierce off guard and nearly cost him his life. Not to mention the magic net platform continued to provide him with a steady stream of income. He'd have money, combat power, and labor, well, a steady stream of fell orc zombies every year. It was the perfect base for starting a business. Harvey had already planned to officially expand the magic network for him after relocating to the new frontier territory, allowing founding members to guarantee the referral of more high-level spellcasters by paying points. Each future member would receive a generous teleportation array service fee, as well as a steady stream of courier shipping costs. Their daily exchanges, discussions on spell matrices, and experimental results would all appear verbatim in Harvey's forum backstage, providing him with valuable knowledge he could plagiarize at any time. The immediate priority was to quickly sort the alchemical materials and see if he could gather a few alchemical creatures capable of carrying them to safely transport the massive Unit 0 to the new territory. The corpses of the fell orcs killed the previous winter, stored in the cellar, could finally be put to use. At least there would be no shortage of transporters, allowing Harvey and Reiner to do the work themselves. Chapter 37. The end of entrepreneurship is to make money. Forum members can pay 100 points to invite a new member to join the forum through referral. After joining, new members will only have access to attend discussion meetings and browse the forum. After a 10-day review period, they will gain the same messaging privileges as full members. The dwarf, codenamed Frost Giant, sat in front of the magic brain, his eyes widening as he looked at the new, full-screen announcement pinned to the top of the crystal board. Great, he slapped his thigh, immediately stood up, and ran to the door, bumping into the dwarf leader, Nolly, who was about to enter. Where are you going in such a hurry? Their long, thick beards tangled, and Nolly pulled away from Copper Hammer with a look of disgust. The Spellcaster Forum, now open for new members. The dwarf leader's eyes lit up, and he grabbed Copper Hammer and demanded, "Really? How many people can we invite?" Copper Hammer pulled him over to the magic brain and pointed at the announcement on the crystal board. "Each official member can invite one new member, but they have to pay 100 points. Tisk, I don't have enough points yet. It's all thanks to that bet I made with that flame pig a few days ago about identifying magical materials." The forum member codenamed Son of Flame had already become Tongchu's virtual rival. Nolly stroked his thick beard, pondered for a moment, and suggested, "Is it possible to exchange points for some? Which member do you think has the most points?" Tongchu shook his head. "I'm not sure. Point exchanges between members are completely confidential unless they voluntarily disclose it." After more than a month of forum exchanges, every initial member realized the importance of the Spellcaster Forum, which was no less important than the real-world Federation, the only difference being that it was in the real world, not the magic net. Moreover, the forum's completely open and confidential exchange of knowledge and information, as well as its groundbreaking technology for instantly teleporting items and materials, far outweighed the bloated and cumbersome rules of the Spellcaster Federation. If it weren't for the rules limiting each member to inviting only one new member, everyone would have immediately spent all their hard-earned points to invite their own faction members to seize the initiative. After all, whoever first formed a dominant group within the forum would stand to gain access to a wealth of magical network technology and advanced knowledge in the future. Thinking of this, Tongchu couldn't help but regret not cherishing his hard-earned points, and he beat his chest and stamped his feet. "Damn it! That flame pig! It took 20 of my points, now where am I supposed to get 100 points? The forum's membership was already small, and the bounties offered in the information exchange section were even fewer. The resources that were offered often required extremely low points, and most people demanded exorbitant prices. Tongchu's expertise was limited to the identification and uses of mineral-based spellcasting materials. He could do nothing about bounties on other types of knowledge. "Wait! You have new news. Look!" Nolly's eyes widened, pointing to the flashing message on the crystal plate. "Kilthuzid, Mr. Frost Giant, I'm sorry to bother with you privately. I wonder if you'd be interested in purchasing some forum points to use towards inviting new members." It was like a sleepyhead finding a pillow. Tongchu lunged at the magic brain, his hands trembling with excitement as he typed the reply. "Frost Giant, how many points do you have? Make an offer." "Kilthuzid, I don't have any current needs for inviting new members, so all my points are available for exchange. However, I must reserve a small portion for next week's exchange meeting. I can offer you 50 points. Kilthuzid. 1 point for 100 gold pounds. I only accept gold pounds. The points will be sent directly through the magic network. Shipping costs are your responsibility." Nolly slammed the table, nearly shattering the magic brain. "Is he robbing me? 100 gold pounds for 1 point? Why doesn't he just come to the Crypt City and rob me?" He considered 1,000 gold pounds for a teleportation array a steal. After all, the technology and functionality were irreplaceable, and it also offered the opportunity to crack and replicate it. But paying 5,000 gold pounds for points, something he couldn't see or touch, only traded in the forum, was a bit hard to accept. After deducting all costs, the net profit from all the magic ore sold by the Crypt City to the Wizard Kingdom and the Alea Federation each year was less than 50,000 gold pounds. Forcing him to cough up even a tenth of that to buy a forum spot was truly a painful loss. Copper Hammer calmed down now and decisively analyzed. "No, I think it's worth it. The forum will undoubtedly grow and expand. Today, we've taken up a membership slot, and this new member will also have the right to recommend new members in the future. Your dream of owning 100 teleportation arrays is no longer just wishful thinking." The dwarf leader walked around the room twice, gradually sorting out his thoughts and realizing that this was indeed the case. If they missed this opportunity, they would fall far behind the other members. He believed that each of the initial members invited to join the forum undoubtedly had their own powerful forces and families behind them. He clenched his fists and gritted his teeth, saying, "Negotiate with him again." Then he walked over to the demon brain and, with a lurch, pushed Copper Hammer out of the chair. "Frost Giant, the price is too high. Can you make it a little cheaper?" "Kilthuzid, I'm sorry, I can't lower the price. My experimental research requires significant funding. If the price is unacceptable to you, I will seek another buyer." Copper Hammer exclaimed, "We can't let him sell his points to anyone else. He rushed over, snatched a magic ring from the table, and hid at the other end of the desk, where he began typing furiously. Frost Giant, deal. Frost Giant, I have only one request. Don't tell any other members about our private point trade. He couldn't let anyone else know about his lack of points. Otherwise, in future auctions, others could easily exploit his weakness and make him miss out on deals. Kilthuzid, no problem. After the deal was successfully concluded, Harvey leaned back in his chair, a satisfied smile spreading across his face. He hadn't chosen just one point trade partner. Besides the Frost Giant, he had also pre-selected targets like the Hand of the Elements, the Son of Fire, and the Ghost Captain. After all, he could clearly see in the back end which members had enough points to invite new members and which were lacking. Aside from the Scorching Lord, who was overflowing with points, the other members were all experiencing varying degrees of shortages. Even those who had previously been silent and rarely commented were eager to trade the points. His greatest satisfaction was that nearly everyone insisted on keeping their transactions confidential, lest their predicament be revealed to others, hindering future transactions on the forum. This wave of covert pressure to spend money would instantly provide him with the vast sums of funds he needed to expand into new territories. Indeed, the end of entrepreneurship is to exploit the leaks and make money by any means possible. Chapter 38 Refugees in the Northern Wasteland. In the wastelands north of the Godspeed Mountains, the most difficult times are when the snow is about to melt. With no harvest left, relying solely on pre-winter reserves, surviving the long, cold winter is an incredibly difficult time for most of the races living in the northern wastes. Early spring brings not only relentless, cold rains, but also cold, hunger, and death. But Dwarf Vaughn feels this winter is different from any other. He believes he has gained something even more precious, freedom. Vaughn is a half-orc, a lowly race born from the interbreeding of humans abducted by demons and fell orcs and brought to the wastelands. Most of the time, lowly creatures like him are called short-lived, meaning they never reach adulthood beyond the age of 16, never even having the chance to produce offspring. They either die in the demonic war draft, driven to the front lines to fill pits against humans, or are tied up with ropes and left to work to death in the mines of the fell orc tribes. Vaughn felt that all his luck had been used up on this single raid south with the fell orcs. Whipped and driven, they slowly migrated from the freezing icy plains to the warmer temperatures near the Sacred Spine Mountains. They were assigned to the tribe's encampment, felling wood, burning mud, and building kilns to cook. Not having to cross the Sacred Spine Mountains into human territory and face direct battle with human wizards who hurled terrifying fireballs and icy blades made Vaughn absolutely certain he could survive the winter. This luck lasted until a month ago, when the fell orcs captured a group of human slaves and brought them back to their camp. Left to the care of the orc laborers, led by Vaughn, these humans served as both slaves to be exchanged for supplies with the demons and as fresh rations for the journey back to the icy plains. Vaughn did not treat these slaves as harshly as the others. Unlike the other orcs, he had seen his mother and knew full well that half of his blood flowed in him, sharing the same bloodline as these humans. News of the demonic invasion of the fell orc king's court reached the icy plains. Vaughn's small tribe, barely able to gain a foothold, hurried back. To avoid being dragged down on the return journey, they casually slaughtered the slaves locked in the wooden cages and quickly evacuated the camp with the rest of their forces. The orc laborers followed suit, except for Vaughn. He cradled a newly orphaned child and hid in a corner of the cage, beneath the weight of several corpses, dodging the fell orc's casual javelins and wooden thorns jabbing at the cage. The child, stunned by the shock, took a moment to recover. He tore a strip of cloth from the dead body and used it to bandage the puncture wound on Vaughn's calf. "Hush, Sam, be gentle. There are still fell orcs around," Vaughn said, his face furrowed in a hideous, beastly manner, his fangs bared as he tried to soothe the trembling child. Sam's sobs instantly ceased. He had been a captive for nearly 2 weeks and was already familiar with the terrifying-looking elder brother, Vaughn. He loved to secretly slip a few slices of burnt cassava into the wooden cages of every child during his night patrols. Brother Vaughn was an ugly, good man. A low groan from the nearby cage lifted Vaughn's spirits. There were still survivors. He stuffed Sam back into the pile of corpses to hide him, then dragged his bloody leg out of the open cage and groped his way toward the sound of the groans. There were 2 wounded. One had been pierced through the shoulder by a spear, blood flowing from his chest to his waist, half his body covered in gore. The other was not so lucky. His stomach was stabbed, his intestines faintly visible through the gaping wound. He was probably not going to survive. The entire camp was silent in the night, with only a few campfires still burning. The fell orcs had left in such a hurry that they hadn't had time to kill all the captured human slaves. Vaughn dragged 2 wounded men from the pile of corpses, bandaging the wound of the one with the most severe abdominal wound with a strip of cloth before continuing to inspect the remaining cages. "Vaughn? You weren't taken?" "For God's sake," another ferocious-looking orc emerged from the brush, nearly frightening Vaughn to death. "Death, why were you left behind too?" He recognized another coolie from his team, a fellow of his own race, around his age. "They kicked me into the river because I was dawdling. I can swim, haha." He hunched over and helped Vaughn pull the surviving human from the pile of corpses, applying a simple bandage. "Leave these slaves behind and let's run, Vaughn." The orc hesitated, scratching his sparse fur and muttering, "But they're all injured. I'm afraid they won't make it back home." Daff frowned, unable to suppress a sneer. "Do you still want to send them back? I'm afraid we'll be shot to death by those human guards as soon as we reach the border." He pointed at his face, then at Vaughn's protruding fangs. "Don't forget what we are. We're not human, not one of their kind." It hurts so much. I'm so cold." The wounded man, who had just been dragged out, groaned in confusion. A long wound on his side slowly oozed blood from under the bandage. Vaughn tied the bandage tighter, looked around at the dozen or so wounded lying on the ground, and gritted his teeth. "At least save them first. We can't leave them here to die. We are half human too. They are half our kind." Dave was finally persuaded by Vaughn. The two of them briefly treated the wounded. Sam, with a face covered in snot and tears but unharmed, began to collect supplies and food from the abandoned evil orc camp to help the wounded. It was too cold, and there might be a freezing rain in the second half of the night. If these people were left in the open, they would surely freeze to death. Even if not, their wounds would quickly worsen after being soaked in water, which would be much more painful than freezing to death. Fortunately, they found a cowhide tent that had not been taken away in time. Although it had several holes, Sam had plugged the gaps with hay, and it could barely keep out the wind and rain. After dragging a dozen wounded people into the tent and lighting a fire to keep warm, they finally settled down temporarily. The meat they hunted a few days ago was taken away. Duff searched the entire camp and only found a few wilted cassavas, which were roasted by the fire. Vaughn said nothing, and took off his leggings that were stained with mud, and found that the wound was a little red, swollen and white. "I'll go get some water from the river. You and Sam, stay here and don't leave." He also wanted to use this opportunity to sort out his chaotic thoughts. Being missed by the evil orcs and not brought back to the icy plains wasn't a bad thing. But he had no real alternative. Following these survivors back to the human kingdom was unthinkable. Perhaps staying in this warmer region southward was a good option. He and Duff were both skilled hunters. Unfortunately, the expected peace didn't last more than a quarter of an hour. When Vaughn returned to camp, carrying the chipped clay pot, he found another person by the campfire. Duff, who had been guarding his spot, was pinned to the ground by the person's chest. Sam, trembling with fear, dared not cry out loudly. He retreated into the tent where the wounded were staying, only peeking out. "Who are you?" Vaughn dropped the pot and fished from his waist a bone-short spear discarded by the evil orcs. Pierce wore a short hunting suit and a dark windbreaker cape, his pale, gaunt face visible from beneath the hood. He had been drawn to the area by the strong smell of blood. Staring at the figure before him, clutching a short spear in both hands and speaking in a trembling, stammering voice, the hunter felt a wave of confusion. "Huh? An evil orc who can speak human language? No, Brother Vaughn is not an evil orc," Sam whispered, peeking out of the tent. The newcomer was clearly human, and looked incredibly powerful. Otherwise, he wouldn't have been able to knock down the muscular Brother Duff with a single kick. Sam feared he'd impulsively mistake him for evil orcs and then and there kill them. We're half orcs, cough cough." Duff struggled to argue, his chest being stepped on. Pierce frowned slightly, remembering that Mr. Arsterlin had previously mentioned that some half-human, half-beast hybrids did indeed inhabit the northern wastes. They must be the two ugly creatures with beast heads and human bodies before him. He loosened his grip, freeing Duff, who was nearly gasping for breath. "What happened here? I smell human blood. Did you kill someone?" The hunter narrowed his eyes, a cold expression on his pale face. "It wasn't us, it was the evil orcs. They've returned to the tunic and can't take these human slaves with them, so they're killing people," Vaughn explained hastily. Pierce reached out, unsheathing his longsword from beneath his cloak, and lifted the flap of the tattered tent before him. Sure enough, a dozen wounded humans, dressed in the garb of ordinary people, lay crammed together in a chaotic mess. The rich stench of blood filled his nostrils, sending a slight lurch through his throat. Pierce closed his eyes, suppressing the unpleasant urge to sip. He pulled a small glass bottle from his bosom and tossed it to Vaughn. It'll quickly stop bleeding in pain, and temporarily boost energy. 1 drop per person, and no more than 3 for those dying. The orc was stunned for a few seconds before reacting. He nodded gratefully and rushed into the tent, clutching the bottle tightly. Pierce glanced up at the sky. If they set out at daybreak, they could bring the survivors back to Lord Harvey's new territory before sunset. Lord Harvey would then decide whether they should stay or go. It was better than abandoning them in the wilderness in the freezing rain, where they would surely perish. While waiting for the 2 orcs to administer medicine to the wounded, Pierce couldn't help but follow the scent to the cages piled high with the dead. Sam, watching from a distance, noticed a mysterious, kindly man lingering over a pool of blood, seemingly hesitating. Finally, seemingly unable to bear it any longer, he crouched down and placed his head near the neck of a dead body, as if about to bite it. Then, with a troubled expression, he stood up again, pulled a clean handkerchief from his pocket, dipped it into the pool of blood, and soaked it thoroughly. He then brought the handkerchief to his lips, tilting his head back and gently twisting it, squeezing out a small amount of blood, which dripped into his mouth. Terrified, Sam quickly covered his mouth to prevent a scream. He discovered that the mysterious man, who was sipping the blood of the dead with his head tilted back, had 2 extremely sharp fangs in his slightly open mouth. Chapter 39 Rescue and Reception. Harvey stood on a slightly leveled open space within the ancient Mage ruins, surveying the disorganized construction site with a look of worry. His original plan had been for Arslan to remain at the manor to continue organizing the materials that needed to be moved. He, Reiner, and Pierce would then proceed to the ruins to investigate the exact location of the energy-absorbing beetle nest within the ruins and plan the subsequent development of their territory. To this end, he mobilized all of the manor's 30-plus fell orc zombies and used newly purchased alchemical materials to create 3 enormous alchemical camels, transformed from the souls of wild reindeer. The reason they chose the Mage ruins as their territory lay not only because of the beetle ore, but more importantly, because the collapsed Mage Tower itself provided readily available building materials. The solid, dense black stone lay scattered abundantly within the pit. All they had to do was set up a pulley and maneuver the alchemical camels to pull it out from the bottom. Who knew that after returning to the ruins in the early spring freezing rain, they discovered that the sinkhole had collapsed even further due to the prolonged rainfall and melting snow. The only good news was that this collapse had revealed a dark entrance to a beetle nest previously hidden underground. Harvey sent 2 alchemical wolf spiders into the cave to investigate, but found no danger. The beetle seemed to be quietly slumbering in the mud without magical energy to feed on. This huge sinkhole needs to have its edges reinforced, otherwise it will continue to collapse. Harvey and Reiner stood in their makeshift tent, studying a hastily drawn topographic map of the ruins. But the sinkhole itself is a natural underground space. We just need to build a shelter structure on top of it, and we'll have a ready-made experimental workshop. Reiner nodded, quickly scribbling Harvey's ideas in a small notebook with a charcoal pencil. He was now the sole contractor for the territory's construction. After all, only he could precisely manipulate the zombie laborers to do the heavy lifting and construction. After we've reinforced the pit, we'll begin building the ground facilities. My plan is a 3-story main building for us to live in. I'll set up a small energy gathering array on the 2nd floor for you and Asdalen to charge. The warehouses and laboratories will all be underground. We'll need a separate passage to connect to the beetle nest. The food storage and utility rooms will be built next to the main building, connected by an open corridor. We can't let daily necessities come into contact with experimental materials. Food safety still needs to be taken into account. Reiner wrote down the details, occasionally offering his own opinions and suggestions. Sir, why don't we just use the black stone at the bottom of the pit to reinforce the edges, saving us the trouble of carrying it back and forth? Harvey nodded in agreement. A wall must be built around the ruins. Each section must be equipped with magical warning devices, and there must be alchemy patrols at night to provide warning. After all, the ruins are no longer within the borders of the human kingdom, greatly increasing the likelihood of unexpected situations and attacks. Harvey had learned his lesson from the previous surprise attack. His entire armed force now consists of only 10 wolf spider alchemy beasts. Not even zombies that require commands to attack. Alchemy camels have no combat capabilities. Their initial modification was designed solely for their carrying capacity and stability. In Asdalan's absence, Pierce and Reiner would take turns staying by Harvey's side, a constant reminder that in reality, he was just a novice spellcaster who couldn't even cast a spell instantly. The two were discussing animatedly when Reiner suddenly dropped his charcoal pencil and notepad and shuddered. "Sir, the wolf spider beasts outside the ruins have sent a warning. Let's go check it out." Perhaps Pierce has returned. Upon arriving at the ruins 3 days ago, Harvey had assigned Pierce daily explorations, following a predetermined route, gradually expanding his explorations around the ruins and toward the wasteland. After all, he was the only hybrid hunter among the group capable of swiftly traversing the pristine mountain forests. With their superior senses and night vision, they were the perfect choice for outpost exploration. "Sir." "Reiner." "I'm back." Harvey spotted Pierce from afar, nimbly leaping onto a broken stone tablet and waving vigorously at them. "How is it going? Have you found any signs of the evil orcs in the wasteland?" Pierce shook his head. "No. The evil orc tribe was invaded, and all those heading south have evacuated." "How did you know?" Harvey asked, puzzled. Pierce pointed behind him. "Sir, I rescued a group of captured human slaves and 2 half-orc laborers in a camp left by evil orcs. They were all seriously injured and walked slower than me. It will probably take a while for them to arrive." Pierce scratched his head embarrassedly. "I'm sorry, sir, I brought them back without your permission. Maybe after settling them down a bit, I can send them away." Harvey interrupted Pierce's explanation. "How can rescuing my own people cause me trouble? You did a good job, and these people may be of great help to me. Set up a few more tents and house them well. After they recover from their injuries, I am willing to hire them to work for me." Pierce and Reiner were stunned at the same time, and their minds couldn't wrap around for a while. "Don't forget, I have in my hand the pioneering order issued by the Lord himself." Harvey winked humorously and laughed. "Maybe in the near future, I will also be a new nobleman with my own territory. Let's not talk about this for now. Let's go and pick them up." Harvey clapped his hands and quickly arranged for Pierce to return the same way. Then he asked Reiner to control the zombies to quickly build a few tents next to the temporary camp. "When people arrive, you must pay attention to the range of the zombies' activities and don't scare the civilians." Reiner nodded, then asked worriedly, "Sir, what about me? What about my identity? If someone finds out?" Harvey patted his shoulder and comforted him. "Don't worry, you are my chief advisor to the outside world. Civilians will not understand these taboos. Just call yourself a spellcaster." Reiner's eyes immediately lit up, and he straightened his chest in an instant, but asked in disbelief, Then I can call myself a spellcaster in the future." Harvey smiled and nodded, pointing to the spellcaster robe on his body. "When the conditions in the territory improve, I will prepare you a spellcaster robe of the same style as the Federation. At least in my territory, you are a real master wizard." Watching Reiner rush out cheering to prepare for the construction of the camp, Harvey shook his head with some amusement. The identities of nobles and spellcasters are indeed more tempting to common people than real money. Chapter 40 New Territory Construction Plan. Reiner opened the tent and entered, clutching a stack of blueprints and paperwork. "My lord, I'm here." Harvey raised his head and pinched his brow, breaking away from his practice of drawing a spell matrix. These past few days had been incredibly busy. Having just moved to new territory, everything had to start from scratch. He had also taken in a batch of human slaves captured by the fell orcs, and Harvey had to worry about the food, shelter, and sanitation of nearly 20 people in the camp. Harvey wasn't short of money right now. The various paid services offered on the MagicNet forum had reaped a tidy sum, saving nearly 30,000 gold pounds for the initial construction of his territory. The problem now was that even with the money, it wasn't easy to buy the supplies he needed. As alchemical beings, Asdalan and Reiner were sensitive to their status and couldn't easily show up in public. Pierce, though alert and calm, had been a simple hunter. Although Asdalan had treated him as a junior and carefully mentored him, Harvey considered his education level to be no more than an elementary school graduate. Apart from Harvey himself, no one else could help him connect with the outside world and establish a supply trading network. Harvey could only pin his hopes on the newly recruited survivors. "Reiner, have all the identities of these individuals been registered?" Reiner straightened his back, flipping through the documents in his hand. "Sir, I've made sure everything is clear." Pierce and I have conducted separate interrogations and cross-checked their identities. These survivors don't come from any modern human nation. They've always lived in the wasteland. Their ancestors migrated there to evade taxes and military service. Harvey was stunned. Aren't they civilians living south of the sacred Spine Mountains? He immediately recalled the history books he had read during his college years. Indeed, in the early days of the war between humans and demons, the Federation and the Church were still locked in a fierce battle, paying little attention to this conflict that threatened humanity's survival. As a result, most human nations chose to fight on their own, relying on the ancient, ordinary knights against the powerful demon armies, putting them at a severe disadvantage. It was during that period that many kingdoms and fiefdoms were stretched thin by the war, leading to widespread extortion and forced extortion, forcing countless civilians, dispossessed of their land and property, to flee their homes. Surprisingly, so many of these refugees had actually fled across the divine Spine Mountains to the northern wastes, thriving and surviving in such harsh conditions. So, are they willing to work for me and stay in my new territory? Reiner nodded. No, none have chosen to leave. Their temporary settlements on the ice plains have been completely overrun. If you are willing to accept them, they are willing to cultivate the land themselves and pay tribute to the Lord? Harvey shook his head. No, I don't need them growing food for me, nor do I need them to perform heavy labor. He pulled a few pages of pre-prepared documents from the documents on his desk and handed them to the bewildered Reiner. Here's the employment contract. Please read it through first. I'll explain any questions you have. Harvey had a clear understanding. His future territory wouldn't need so many people engaged in menial labor. What he truly needed were skilled workers with a certain level of knowledge and manufacturing skills. This meant that for a long time, this raw labor force would need to complete literacy education while simultaneously building the territory. The security and military strength of the territory could be guaranteed by the constantly transforming alchemical beasts. In the short term, food and other daily necessities could be supplied through imports. Once the technology matured, the use of alchemical life forms in agricultural production would yield far greater benefits than manual labor. So, we must first complete the territory's infrastructure and proceed according to the previous construction plan. Reiner nodded, then asked hesitantly, then, where do we get the necessary supplies and materials? Harvey covered his face and sighed. I'll do it myself. Jackdaw Town, Grizzly Castle, Danius, wherever I can find them. No other chamber of commerce was willing to undertake the cross-border transportation of goods. Ultimately, the large quantities of purchased supplies and materials would have to be transported to the territory bit by his own alchemical camels. Everything is so difficult at the beginning. Master Reiner, I don't quite understand. What do you mean by hiring us? Inside the sheltered tent, several survivors sat cross-legged on the ground, surrounding Reiner with a flurry of questions. Doesn't the Lord want us to cultivate his fields? Then what will we eat? Are they going to make us work in the mines? Reiner clutched the documents in his hand, feeling his alchemical brain heating slightly. Stop. Everyone, stop. Let me explain. Everyone was still terrified of this strange, seemingly kind, but towering and terrifying spellcaster, and they all fell silent upon hearing his words. First of all, those who voluntarily join Lord Harvey's territory need to sign an employment contract, which means that you are willing to work for the Lord, and the Lord needs to be responsible for your personal safety and pay for your work. The middle-aged man leading the survivors was stunned when he heard this. His eyes widened and he asked in a trembling voice with some disbelief, we don't have to be serfs. And, we don't need to pay taxes. Reiner nodded and continued to read expressionlessly. By voluntarily signing the contract, you can become free people in the Lord's territory. The wages paid to you for your work have already deducted taxes. The half-orc Vaughn stammered and interrupted. Then, what salary can you use it for? Reiner looked around and explained skillfully, of course it belongs to your own property. You can use it to buy food, clothes, livestock, houses. Dave only heard the first half of the sentence. His eyes lit up, and he asked in a low voice with a mouth full of fangs, Can I buy women? Human trafficking is prohibited within the territory. Reiner secretly clenched his fists. Don't interrupt. Wait until I'm finished. Vaughn, however, could no longer listen to Reiner's next words. No longer would they have to live as slaves within the Lord's domain. Their labor could earn them wages, allowing them to buy themselves adequate food and warm clothing. Once their wages accumulated to a certain level, they could even purchase their own homes, without having to worry about their possessions being easily taken. The Lord even claimed responsibility for ensuring their safety and security. It felt like such a wonderful prospect he had never dreamed of. Although he still didn't know what kind of work he would be doing in service to the Lord, the orc couldn't wait for the strange, metal-clad wizard to finish his ramblings. He quietly bent his legs, supported himself with his hands, and slid slowly to Reiner's side, trying to force a smile onto his grim face. "Master Reiner, I am willing to sign that contract to serve the Lord." Chapter 41 The Second Teleportation Array. For the past week, Harvey's new territory has been progressing smoothly. The pioneering order he received from the Lord of Grizzly Castle originally limited his territory to the northern slopes of Jackdaw Ridge and the ancient Mage ruins at its foot. However, in principle, the Lord had no right to grant unclaimed land outside the national border to nobles. The pioneering order was the only formality to formally confirm Harvey's land ownership. Whether he could truly establish a foothold here depended entirely on the efforts of the pioneers themselves. Therefore, when planning his territory, Harvey didn't strictly adhere to the designated boundaries of the pioneering order. In his pursuit of whatever he could, he pushed the boundary marker far beyond the wasteland valley. The total area of this land far exceeded the territory of the Earl of Grizzly Castle. A total of 19 new subjects had signed employment contracts. Excluding children under the age of 16, only 15 people were available to work on the territory's development. This resulted in a severe shortage of labor, not only for construction materials, but also for supplies in the short term. Harvey could only devote all his manpower and alchemy beasts to the construction of the core of the territory, leaving no spare manpower for other tasks. Thanks to everyone's efforts, the walls of the massive, repeatedly collapsing crater at the center of the ruins had been reinforced, neatly paved with black stone blocks piled at the bottom. The residents themselves didn't need to do much heavy labor. All lifting and hoisting work was handled by Reiner and his alchemy beasts, and they only needed to provide support. Before the initial construction of the territory was completed, the Lord provided free food, freeing them from the servitude and oppression of the past. This easy and convenient work made most of the new residents feel that their future was bright. However, a few were somewhat concerned, feeling a sense of insecurity in this seemingly unbelievably comfortable life. The half-orc Vaughn was one of them. "Def, do you think the rations the Lord provides us will be deducted from our salaries in the future?" Vaughn asked quietly nudging Daff's side as he worked on tying the stone blocks to the hoisting bracket. Dave didn't think that far ahead. He glanced at Reiner, who stood commanding from his perch, and whispered, "Master Reiner said all new residents will receive 3 months of free food." "Why are you overthinking it?" His eyes flickered, a thought dawning on him. With a hint of excitement, he leaned into Vaughn's ear and whispered, "Besides, every day we get barley bread and juicy roasted venison. What else could you ask for?" Currently, the daily rations for everyone in the territory were purchased by Pierce and his alchemical camel from Jackdaw Town, supplemented by a small amount of meat from hunted game. This level of rations had already transformed the quality of life for the residents, who had previously been accustomed to sustenance of bran flatbreads and roasted cassava. Initially, they'd simply hoped to fill their stomachs, but now, not only were they well fed, but every meal was also filled with meat. It was said that the Lord would also distribute a batch of cloth as a work reward after the main building was completed. Several refugees, who had lived their entire lives in the wasteland and never had the chance to taste flour-based food, nearly choked with excitement as they bit into the soft, barley bread smothered in barbecue grease. "Once the Lord's main building is finished, we'll start building our own residence. What do you think?" "Want to live with me?" Dave suggested with a smile. "That way, we only need to buy a house, and we can pool our money to buy a wife." Vaughn rolled his eyes. "I've told you countless times, the Lord forbids the trafficking of human beings." He paused, trying to recall what he had heard from other residents. "Well, to get a wife, you need a lot of money, a house, and maybe some land of your own. Otherwise, how will you feed your children?" Dave was startled and stammered, "So much for a wife? My father had 19 children and was able to support 8 of them. If I work hard, I should be able to afford it." As Dallin stood beside Harvey, looking up at the brand new continental-level teleportation array before him. "Why get another one of these? Isn't the one we have enough?" Harvey had procured this new teleporter through various sources on the Magic Net forums, using the codename Kilthuzid. It came from the capital of Orland, the closest mage kingdom to the Evil Moon Mountains, and was a deprecated model. Harvey set it up side by side with Unit 00 at the bottom of the pit, in the center of the laboratory. Since the roof hadn't been completed yet, he could only temporarily cover it with a tarpaulin. You don't understand. The energy output of Unit 00 is already insufficient to support the magic network for him and the teleportation service. Harvey tapped the brass shaft of the new instrument with satisfaction. The second instrument will primarily supply energy to the alchemy beasts. Once the main building is completed, you and Ronner's energy provider will construct a separate small magic array. Furthermore, due to the difficulties in procuring and transporting supplies, Harvey planned to connect the second instrument's teleportation array to the warehouse he was building in Jackdaw Town. This would ensure a steady flow of abundant supplies to the new territory. Harvey had already contacted George Santos of the Dragonstone Chamber of Commerce. He was an old partner, after all, and Harvey still held the dividend share in the soap workshop. He was also happy to provide procurement and transportation services for Harvey's territory, but the transportation destination was limited to Jackdaw Town, so he would need to set up a warehouse there and use the teleportation array for transit. As Dallin frowned slightly, questioning, using a teleportation array to transfer goods? But the matrix you designed doesn't allow for a single transfer of cargo, so it can't possibly handle the demand? Harvey had anticipated his concerns and, with a smile, pointed to the slightly different array inscriptions on the bases of the two instruments. The matrix diagram for Unit 2 differs significantly from Unit 0. I've tweaked it, sacrificing the advantage of instantaneous transmission and reception while maintaining the same cargo capacity. This was Harvey's research into the energy compression properties of beetle ore applied to the interdimensional teleportation of the magic network. It could guarantee cargo collection within 6 hours, yet could transport hundreds of kilograms in a single transfer. And I wouldn't need to use my mental power to enter the magic network for teleportation. A mere transfer across a mountain range, less than 100 kilometers, would require significant energy consumption. The only thing that was causing Harvey a bit of a pain was that his previously accumulated startup capital had been rapidly draining away like a flood. After lavishly purchasing supplies and various materials, he now had less than 10,000 gold pounds available. Of the two options for increasing revenue and reducing expenditure, increasing revenue was clearly more important. We need to find a way to profit from the magic network forum. Let's start with the new members who are about to join the forum. If you are listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means it was downloaded and re-uploaded without effort. We warmly invite you to visit our channel, Fanfic World. There you will find the original version of this story and many other novels of various genres. We look forward to seeing you dive into a world of incredible novels. Chapter 42. New members join. The clock's hands steadily moved to 9 o'clock. High-level spellcaster Fran McCollin dropped the thick paperwork in his hands and walked over to a delicate alchemical instrument shaped like a typewriter, sitting down firmly. He inserted a crystal-clear, high-grade magic stone into a slot on the side of the instrument. He raised his arm and gently tapped the keys, entering his preset codename, Magic Shield. The inscription on the base of the alchemical instrument, named Magic Brain, instantly glowed faintly red, and mercury, like tadpoles, formed the words on the crystal plate. Fran McCollin narrowed his eyes, his gaze fixed on his target. This magic network forum the Quinn brothers were talking about actually exists. Are they playing a prank on me? The twin brothers, who had always been on good terms with Fran a week ago, suddenly and mysteriously visited him. They also brought him an alchemical device called the Magic Brain and told him about an invitation to participate in a mysterious exchange meeting in the magical network space called the Spellcaster Forum. Initially, Fran was reluctant to pay any attention to them. The twin brothers, often whimsical, had pranked Fran with various alchemical gizmos in their youth. But when the Quinn brothers took him to their laboratory to personally inspect and verify the magical network teleportation array, Fran truly realized the astonishing nature of this anonymous organization. They possessed instantaneous magical network communication technology, as well as a magical network teleportation array capable of instantly receiving and transmitting items, something that even the research spellcasters of the Union could not achieve. If he joined the forum, he would have the opportunity to obtain this technology, which represented a major breakthrough in magical network research. Not only would he be able to participate in the forum, but even in the magical network teleportation experiments, he would have no problem participating. Because he came from the same alchemist family as the Quinn brothers, this background, which was a real disadvantage for a spellcaster, meant that he spent 15 years in the Magic Affairs Department of the Spellcaster Union without any chance of promotion. As for the Quinn brothers' overt and covert hints that he would support them in the forum in the future, Fran felt it was only natural. Born from the same clan, they naturally needed to stick together to reap the benefits. Hand of the Elements. Good evening, everyone. Good evening, Mr. Administrator, Scorching Lord. I've seen several new members. Please allow me to welcome them. Fran's heart skipped a beat. The members of this mysterious forum exchange were quite friendly and polite. They must be high-ranking members of major spellcasting organizations in real life. He remembered that the Quinn brothers had told him that only high-level spellcasters were eligible to participate in the forum exchanges, and there might even be legendary spellcasters among the members. Heart of the Forest, welcome new members. We foresee our future growth. Man in the mirror, I have to praise Mr. Turing. Fran studied the text messages that kept popping up on the crystal board, trying to find a codename that could be the Quinn brothers, but there were too many people, and the greetings were meaningless. He was at a loss for words. All he could do was wait until the exchange meeting was over and have the Quinn brothers contact him. Ghost Captain, everyone, I'm seeking an analysis of a modified spell matrix involving the water element. I wonder if anyone is interested in accepting this commission? Fran was stunned when she saw the message. What? Research on spell analysis could be delegated? To learn any non-universal spell of any tier, a spellcaster must analyze and inscribe the spell matrix within their own magic patterns. Successful analysis allows for successful spellcasting, and inscription allows for instantaneous casting. This is common knowledge for any academic spellcaster during their apprenticeship. At this forum, someone was actually publicly outsourcing knowledge that normally requires independent research. This would undoubtedly break down the knowledge barriers between spellcasting organizations and factions. Elemental Hand, I'm particularly skilled in elemental spell analysis at Ghost Captain. Please speak to me privately after the meeting. Someone had accepted the commission. Fran was secretly shocked. This person must be a high-level spellcaster or above. Scorching Lord, if you need spell analysis for advancement, please contact me privately. Spell analysis for advancement? Fran knew that spellcasters need to analyze higher-level spell matrices within their magic patterns to synchronize the energy of the magic patterns with a magic network space, achieving a higher level of spellcasting. This person might be the suspected legendary spellcaster the Quinn brothers mentioned. Could it be one of those reclusive high-ranking members of the Union? Son of Flame, everyone, I have a high-level magical artifact from the Demon Clan that I'd like to share. It aids meditation and has a certain degree of spellcasting amplification. Trading is for points only. If interested, please contact me privately. This person is undoubtedly a combat spellcaster who experienced the demon war in the Evil Moon Mountains. As a high-ranking member of the Union's Magical Affairs Department, Fran was keenly aware of the other party's identity. Frost Giant, huh? Another exorbitant price, huh? Son of Flame, don't complain if you can't afford it. Magic items can be traded. Fran was pleasantly surprised, but then immediately thought of the magical teleportation array the Quinn brothers had shown him, the very foundation of the forum's anonymous transactions. He'd also taken turns guarding the Evil Moon Mountains and possessed several impressive high-level magical artifacts. However, in the real world, spellcasters often traded without regard for money, and material exchanges were difficult to match quickly, so he'd never had the opportunity to sell them. Perhaps this forum exchange would offer a chance to exchange for the spellcasting materials or experimental items he'd been lacking. Fran was left scratching his head at the thought. Why weren't new members allowed to speak, only to listen in? Kilthuzid, everyone, I recently discovered an undiscovered mineral in an ancient mage ruin. Anyone interested in participating in the research? Frost Giant, unknown mineral? Where was it found? Is it truly undiscovered? Child of Fire, humph. Are you trying to freeload on someone else's discoveries? Have some shame. It's common for spellcasters to explore ancient ruins, and the dangers involved are proportional to the rewards. The ancient ruins are no less dangerous. Successfully exploring and finding all the rewards demonstrates the spellcaster's profound knowledge and powerful magical abilities. Fran believed this spellcaster couldn't have explored alone. At the very least, they needed the backing of an organization, working as a team. Frost Giant, I'm willing to pay a price in exchange for ore samples or preliminary research results. Mr. Kilthuzid, please contact me personally. Kilthuzid, no problem. The discussion continued on the topic of ley-lined roaming, and Fran was astonished to discover the forum members' astonishingly deep research into ley-line space. There were reports of observing unknown energy surges within the ley line, and claims that a certain point in the ley line space might be the location of an alien rift. What the hell is the Union's ley line observation department for? They can't even compare to the in-depth research conducted by a single, anonymous group of spellcasters. Man in the mirror, I wonder if you've received the news, but the recent war in the Evil Moon Mountains has been somewhat unfavorable. A new hybrid monster has appeared in the demonic tribe, causing significant damage to low-level spellcasters. Fran's eyes narrowed slightly, and he immediately became alert. This information about the war was exactly what Fran had told them privately a few days ago. After all, they were primarily responsible for the research and development and manufacture of combat-oriented alchemical prosthetics, and the battle report hadn't even been made public within the Federation or published in the Federation's bulletin. Hey, Brother Quinn, I finally got your foreign code names. If I had permission to speak at the exchange meeting, would you two be here to show off your well-informedness? Humph. Chapter 43 Mass Production of Alchemy Beasts. What's wrong with these alchemy beasts? Harvey gazed at the pile of wolf-spider alchemy beasts before him, their limbs missing and their shells scarred and mottled, and the urge to turn and flee rose within him. Sir, aside from the 10 or so wolf spiders that patrol daily, the rest of the wolf spiders and camels have been assigned to the construction site, carrying and lifting heavy stone. Damage is inevitable. Reiner felt his heart ache. These alchemy beings, like him, who had been transferred through soul transfer, though of low intelligence, were usually very docile and obedient. The alchemy beasts have a relatively low wear and tear rate, but the zombies have a much higher failure rate. The 30 orc zombies we previously stockpiled are constantly being crushed by stone or accidentally falling from the pit. Reiner was incredibly busy. Besides the daily operations of the alchemy beasts, he also had to constantly give them work instructions. If he wasn't careful, the zombies would tear him apart. Harvey covered his face in silence, not wanting to hear any more. We need to increase the number of working alchemies. We can't have combat-oriented alchemies like wolf spiders involved in construction work anymore. The wolf spider's metal limbs are slender and fragile. They allow for swift and agile sneaking and climbing in combat, and can even be used as weapons to pierce through enemies when necessary. But they're completely flawed for construction work. As Dallin diligently repairs broken wolf spiders daily, most of which are caused by broken legs, Harvey suddenly remembered the group of unknown primates he'd seen wandering and roaring wildly through the mountain streams and jungles while surveying the terrain with Pierce a few days ago. Monkeys. Yes. Use monkeys to transform alchemies. He slapped his head and stood up. He'd previously discovered that alchemies transformed from human souls, like Reiner, have exceptional abilities in memory and learning. The wolf spiders transformed from Grey Wolf retain the tracking and stealth abilities of canines, and they subconsciously excel at fighting in groups. The ability of camels to carry heavy loads and achieve stable long-distance transport is undoubtedly due to the fact that reindeer are naturally suited to carrying loads and long-distance migration. This clearly demonstrates that the soul transformation of different species manifests different racial talents. Besides humans, the alchemical beings skilled at work are undoubtedly primates that have learned to use simple tools. Reiner, have Pierce capture a few monkeys or gorillas immediately. Don't delay. I need to conduct the transformation experiment tonight. Reiner nodded, preparing to leave with the blueprints. Wait. Have Pierce bring 2 experienced hunters with him. Those 2, what's their name? Orcs. This was the first time Vaughn and Dave had visited the Lord's underground laboratory since the roof of the main castle was completed. During work hours, they often saw those various iron monsters, each gleaming with a metallic sheen, coming in and out of the underground. But everyone was used to it. These iron monsters were agile and incredibly strong, saving them countless efforts in building the main fort. The people loved working with them. But the evil orc zombies, wrapped in linen but still emitting a faint stench of decay, were less appealing. Especially when Vaughn went out to the bathroom at night. He saw them quietly lined up in a single file under the moonlight, slowly emerging from the basement of the main fort and into the dark and eerie woods. Today, they were suddenly summoned by Mr. Pierce to go to a mountain valley a short distance from the main fort to complete the Lord's mission and capture some monkeys. Vaughn, what do you think the Lord needs live monkeys for? These skinny, fatless creatures can't taste good no matter how you cook them, Dave and Vaughn whispered, standing side by side in a corner of the underground laboratory. Vaughn was also puzzled. He and Daph were indeed skilled in the hunting technique of hurling rocks and slinging slings, which might be why they had been chosen by Mr. Pierce. Flying rocks could accurately stun monkeys wandering through the treetops without killing them outright. As the two men huddled in a corner, whispering, Harvey and Reiner had already prepared their experiments. Standing at the lab table, they beckoned them to bring the monkeys, strung together with ropes. Vaughn, seeing the Lord up close for the first time, approached with a slight bow of fear, his eyes fixed on the floor. He remembered clearly what Reiner had said about the Lord being a powerful spellcaster. "What's your name?" a gentle voice echoed from above. Vaughn shuddered and stammered, "Lord, my name is Vaughn, and his is Deaf." Harvey nodded, delighted with the orcs' hunting skills. Almost every monkey they brought back alive had a large bruise on its head from the rocks, but none of it had killed them. They're good at throwing rocks, and their control is excellent. Harvey felt they were underemployed as construction workers and glanced at Pierce. "Let them work with you on patrol and security." Pierce nodded, bowed, and then tugged at the dazed orcs, leading them back to the wall. "Reiner, let's get started on the transformation experiments. We haven't captured many specimens yet, so keep your success rate high." Reiner deftly gagged the squeaking monkeys with a cloth, then strapped them to the lab table and hooded them. "How is it going? Can you establish a connection with them and issue commands?" Harvey asked, concerned as Reiner, who was connected to the energy line, nodded. The inscription on the alchemical prosthetics had continued to illuminate, as if maintaining the connection. "Yes, sir, though I sense their souls are rather restless and chaotic, filled with confusion and fear." This time, the transformation vehicles were humanoid chem beasts, resembling dwarves but with extended arms. Reiner controlled a completed chem beast, causing it to raise its knee-length metal arms and pick up a screwdriver from the lab bench. He then staggered over to another chem beast and, using the screwdriver, deftly removed its arm. He then controlled 3 more chem beasts, gathering them around the lab bench, to collaboratively complete the task of assembling prosthetic parts. Primates have far higher intelligence than ordinary beasts, which will make their control more difficult, as Dallin came over to observe. "Well, I can try to control them too. Reiner might have trouble managing these dozen or so alchemy beasts alone." Harvey patted Reiner on the shoulder and encouraged, "With more practice, it won't be long before these alchemy beasts are ready to work." He then turned to look at Pierce, who was standing guard against the wall at the laboratory entrance, preventing any accidents. "Pierce, for the next few days, you and Vaughn and the others, take some time out every day to hunt monkeys. I want to convert a large number of these working alchemy beasts." Harvey looked at the dozen or so dwarf alchemy beasts that had been successfully converted with satisfaction. He believed that before long, he would have a large number of high-quality assembly line aces. Let's name these alchemy beasts the 007 working type. Chapter 44, Territory Population Increases. As the weather gradually warmed across the northern wastes, the main fortress of Harvey's territory neared completion. Unlike his initial plan to build it simply as a wizard's tower, Harvey began to consider the potential for a new population. According to the orcs Vaughn and Dave, if the news of a demonic invasion of the fell orc tribes was reliable, a large number of refugees fleeing south from the war were highly likely. Whether human refugees or fugitive orc slaves, they might gradually migrate to the foothills of the Divine Spine Mountains. After all, along the entire Divine Spine, there were only 3 mountain gaps at lower altitudes that could be crossed by human effort. Besides the demon battlefields of the Fell Moon Mountains and the Elven Kingdom of the Misty Forest, the only other gap was Jackdaw Ridge on the border of St. Varen. Harvey saw this as a prime opportunity to attract new people and enrich his territory. With working alchemy beasts as the primary construction labor force, Harvey was finally able to overcome his manpower constraints. Therefore, while maintaining the original main fortress structure, he also built houses capable of accommodating 500 people near the river. Each of the 2-story houses was constructed with cut stone as the first floor and wood as the second. Each floor encompassed 20 square meters, with the first floor divided into 2 areas, the kitchen and bathroom, and the second floor housing 2 bedrooms. Drainage channels had been dug between the houses and covered with stone slabs to divert domestic sewage downstream, thus preventing contamination of the upstream water supply. The approximately 20 residents who first joined the territory were given priority in the row of houses near the castle, based on their existing family structures. This was the reward Harvey had promised for participating in the territory's construction, a 2-story cabin with a fireplace and 3 months of free food. Vaughn and Dave also received their desired cabins, much to the delight of the Orc brothers, who had previously only slept in earthen huts and in the open air. "Vaughn, look! I was right, The Lord really built us a house. Dave rubbed the mud off his rough feet before carefully guiding Vaughn inside. Look at this fireplace. Look at this table. We don't have to squat to eat anymore. Dave ran around the room, touching everything and looking at it with great satisfaction. There's even a squat toilet. Haha, no need to freeze naked in the open air. Vaughn nodded with a smile and cautiously wiped the mud off his feet at the door before stepping into the room. There are 2 bedrooms on the 2nd floor. Oh my god, there are beds, Dave exclaimed in surprise, and immediately threw himself onto the wooden bed with only a hard top part and rolled around. Haha, we need to get some furs and hay. It will be more comfortable to sleep on. Vaughn stroked the slightly rough surface of the wooden bed, his face also full of satisfaction. Suddenly, Sam's timid call came from downstairs. Brother Vaughn. Brother Daff. Are you home? Daff flung open the 2nd floor window and beamed at Sam, who was standing downstairs. Little Sam, do you want to move in with us? I'll catch you some weasels and roast them. Sam looked up sheepishly, declining. No, I'm staying with Grandpa Rooney from the same village. He's old and needs care. After a spring of getting along, the human refugees had completely accepted the 2 apologetic-looking half-orcs. Everyone was grateful for their life-saving grace, and no one looked down on them for their half-blood status. By the way, Lord Pierce just sent me to find you. Go quickly, Sam reminded them, remembering his purpose. When the 2 men strode to the main keep, they found Pierce already waiting at the gate. Find 3 more strong men, bring rations and medicine, and follow me immediately, the hunter ordered bluntly. Yes, sir, Vaughn instinctively puffed out his chest and agreed, then, blushing, whispered, where are we going? The Glacier Valley. The patrolling alchemists spotted traces of human refugees. Harvey waited anxiously in the territory for about 3 days before finally seeing Pierce's safe return. How are the refugees? How are they doing? Are they willing to come to the territory? Pierce took the small glass bottle from Asdalin, swirled a bright red liquid inside, and awkwardly bowed to Harvey before turning his back and drinking the liquid. Sir, don't worry, the hunter had been traveling so fast these past 2 days, his already pale face looking even more dusty. There are about 500 refugees, but mostly the elderly, women, and children. They say they were chased all the way here by the evil orcs. Have you found any trace of the evil orcs? Harvey was a little frightened. If they really encountered a large group of evil orcs, he wouldn't be able to provide support in such a short time. No, after they crossed the glacial valley, most of the young and strong men stayed on the riverbank to cover their retreat, leaving the women and children to cross first. Pierce sighed, clenching his fists. By the time we arrived, there were no survivors left on the riverbank. The evil orcs seemed unwilling to pursue us, killing all the remaining survivors and simply leaving. Harvey also sighed, a mixture of sympathy and regret. Pierce continued his report. I'll have Vaughn and Dave stay at the refugee camp and organize their gradual advance towards the territory. I'll return to report to you. Harvey nodded, satisfied with Pierce's arrangement. But I'll still have to trouble you to make another trip, taking all the wolf spiders except the guards, to meet them. Harvey frowned thoughtfully. I'm worried the evil orcs will return, leaving these refugees defenseless. Pierce accepted the order and stood up, ready to count the wolf spiders before returning to the valley. Wait, Harvey called to the tired-looking hunter, turning to wink at Asdalin. Asdalin nodded slightly, pulled out a glass test tube filled with blood from his bosom, and handed it to the bewildered Pierce. This blood is different from the one you just drank, Harvey said calmly. This isn't deer blood. Pierce was taken aback, then instantly understood what Harvey meant. He put the test tube back into the bag at his waist, bowed again, and turned to leave. Harvey watched the hunter leave the main hall of the castle, then turned around and joked with Asdalin. Luckily, Pierce is the only vampire under my command, a vampire. Otherwise, I'd probably have to open a voluntary blood donation station just to meet your needs. Ha. He called Reiner over and quickly ordered, have the residents remaining in the territory count all the vacant houses. The refugees will arrive in 2 days at most. We can't let them sleep in tents outdoors. And the food warehouses need to be inventoried, too. We need to set up a distribution plan based on demand. We need to strictly control daily rations now, as additional supplies won't arrive for another 2 weeks. Reiner nodded and took notes quickly. After Harvey stopped talking, he asked with some confusion, Sir, we've recruited so many people, but we don't have any work for them right now. He scratched his smooth metal head, his tone a little distressed. And we need to provide them with free shelter and food. The supplies we've worked so hard to accumulate in the warehouse will soon be gone. Harvey and Asdalen couldn't help but laugh at Reiner's miserly attitude. Don't worry about this little bit of effort. Don't worry, once they've rested for a few days, I'll have plenty of work for them. They won't be able to slack off then, Harvey promised confidently. After all, the agricultural-grade alchemy beast he and Asdalen had developed was almost ready for use. Chapter 45 Exploring the Beetle Nest. Harvey had been traveling frequently between Jackdaw Town and Grizzly Castle these past few days, scrambling to buy all sorts of supplies for the territory. Shortly after arriving at the main fort with his alchemical camel, Asdalen and Reiner hurriedly approached him. I've been observing the underground insect nests, and it seems the beetles are laying eggs again, Asdalen said as he led Harvey to the underground laboratory. I think we should be able to harvest another wave of beetle ore this time. Harvey was surprised and delighted. The beetle ore they had previously collected from the ruins, after using it to maintain Unit 2's energy-focusing array and equipping the alchemical beasts as high-powered lethal weapons, was already scarce. Harvey and Asdalen had previously entered the underground insect nests and observed the beetles' life patterns, but had not yet collected any beetle ore. Harvey felt somewhat discouraged, believing that the reproduction cycle of these mysterious beetles might be extremely long. Therefore, the idea of relying on the beetles' rapid reproduction and harvesting the ore products left after their death was likely doomed. After all, if these beetles were killed directly, they wouldn't produce naturally occurring energy minerals, they would only yield a pile of useless carcasses. Who could have known that in just a few months, they would actually begin breeding again? The three of them excitedly hurried to the underground laboratory, eager to observe the beetle reproduction firsthand. Amazing, Reiner exclaimed in amazement as he gazed at the densely packed swarm of luminescent beetles within the hive. The hive, dug by the beetles themselves, was not large. It was Harvey who had the alchemy beast expand the hive, making it half the size of the underground laboratory during its construction. Harvey discovered that the beetles weren't very good at digging. Perhaps they simply preferred the damp, warm environment underground, forcing them to burrow underground. Normally, these round insects, with their pale metallic shells, don't emit light. Therefore, Asdalen believed that this phenomenon only occurred once they entered their reproductive cycle, perhaps to attract a mate in the darkness for reproductive purposes. I wonder how long their reproduction cycle will last, and how long it will take for beetle ore to form and be harvested. Reiner gently picked up a beetle between his fingers, watching it slide its slender legs repeatedly in his metal palm, struggling desperately and clumsily. What a miraculous little creature. It possesses such powerful energy, yet it's completely unaggressive, Asdalen scoffed, pulling a primary magic stone from his belt and gently tossing it into the swarm of insects. That's because the energy fluctuations in your body are sealed by the inscriptions, making them undetectable. Look, the magic stone dropped into the swarm, instantly triggering a violent commotion. Countless beetles desperately slithered their legs, rapidly closing in on it. For a moment, a creepy rustling sound echoed throughout the hive. Within 10 seconds, the swarm dispersed, leaving only a pile of grayish-white crystalline debris behind the magic stone. If your alchemical prosthesis is powered by energy release, you'd probably end up like that magic stone when you got here. Reiner jumped, clutching the magic stone socket at his waist and taking a few steps back. Harvey tugged at him with amusement. Don't scare Reiner. The inscriptions on the alchemical prosthesis are designed to seal in direct energy. As long as we don't release the magical energy generated by the beetle ore within the hive, nothing will happen, Asdalen nodded. I'll monitor the hive day and night, striving to harvest the energy ore from the beetles as soon as possible. After returning to the underground laboratory, Asdalen and Reiner each went their separate ways. Harvey's mind kept turning to Reiner's question. They store such powerful energy, yet they're completely non-aggressive? Perhaps to the beetles themselves, energy is simply food, a nutrient that helps them reproduce and lay eggs. These beetles normally don't have many ways to obtain energy. After being drawn to the ancient wizard's ruins, they'd likely already exhausted their available energy sources, leading them to spend most of their time dormant, looking as gray as pebbles. So, if I regularly add a certain amount of philosopher's stone to the hive, actively feeding them, would that accelerate their growth and reproduction? Harvey immediately decided to carve out a section of the underground space to raise a separate batch of beetles using philosopher's stone, comparing it to the beetles in the original hive. This approach might actually yield unexpected results, but the consumption of philosopher's stone is a bit alarming, making it one of the most wasteful research activities in the world of spellcasting. Recharged Philosopher's Stones are reusable, while single-element Philosopher's Stones like Elemental and Nature are single-use, resulting in a higher price for recharged Philosopher's Stones. For the next forum exchange meeting, we must find a way to find someone with a large stockpile of magic stone, or someone with direct connections to the Burrow Dwarven mines. Only through this connection can we obtain sufficient, high-quality magic stone. He couldn't possibly hope that a high-quality magic stone mine would suddenly appear in his desolate northern territory. For the next few days, Harvey remained in the underground laboratory, closely observing the beetles' reproduction and egg-laying. Furthermore, he and Azdarin set up a separate observation chamber in a corner of the laboratory, covered in transparent glass, and captured approximately 100 beetles. 10 low-level magic stones were added daily to the observation chamber, and the beetles' feeding habits and speed were meticulously recorded. It seems they can't absorb energy indefinitely. For these 100 or so beetles, the daily intake limit is 10 primary magic stones. Look at the beetles that have fully fed, the glow they emit is brighter than the others, as Darren explained carefully, holding the experimental record book and observing closely against the glass wall. Harvey still felt a bit of a pain in the ass. He only had less than 100 energy-charging magic stones in reserve, and nearly half of them had already been used up in just a few days. He couldn't bear to feed the remaining 10 or so mid-level magic stones to the insects. They were important supplies that Reiner and Azdalan had to carry with them when they went out and replenish at any time. I have a feeling that maybe within a few days, they will begin to reproduce, and then transform after death. Transformation. The dead beetle corpses can be transformed into energy ores. And the living beetles can actively absorb magical energy. An idea suddenly flashed through Harvey's mind, and he couldn't help but jump up from his chair. Azdalan, what do you say, if I transform the beetle's soul and let it enter the alchemical prosthesis, will it be possible to create an alchemical beetle that can actively release powerful energy? Chapter 46 The Age of Hot Weapons. Harvey had opened a new observation room in his basement laboratory. It was used to test his newly developed alchemical life forms, or more accurately, alchemical weapons, transformed from beetle souls. In the past, when research conditions were difficult, Harvey had used insects for soul transfer experiments. Although the results were generally less than encouraging, the fact that insect souls could slightly power alchemical devices remained undeniable. The beetle soul transfer experiments were now different. With a massive energy boost from the energy focusing array, not only had the transfer success rate increased several times, but Harvey had also meticulously modified the energy output pathways. Are you planning to use this thing to carry the energy-absorbing beetle soul? Azdalan asked, puzzled, as he gazed at the bizarrely shaped alchemical artifact on the laboratory table. It resembled a thick, solidly cast iron rod, but the rod itself was hollow. Its entire shaft was covered in densely engraved inscriptions, and a wide wooden handle was attached to one end, creating a look that was both strange and harmonious. How was it made? I can't remember when we first had an alchemy workshop capable of smelting metal. Harvey smiled as he picked up the iron rod, placing it flat against his chest and raising it slightly, aiming like a bow. I had it custom-made from the alchemy quest. Their metalworking is more than adequate for this transformation experiment. Azdarin's eyes flickered with a dark red soul fire. Suddenly feeling impatient, he pulled a glowing beetle from a small iron cage, secured it to the lab table with a bracket, and began to urge Harvey on. Then show me your brilliant idea. What this thing can do is what I'm most interested in. As the low hum of the energy focusing array began to rise and then cease, the inscription on the iron rod connected to it slowly illuminated. Not bad. Only 2 beetles were used to complete a transfer. A 50% success rate. Harvey was quite satisfied. This success rate meant that, as long as the beetles could reproduce in sufficient numbers, this thing could be mass-produced. He disconnected the energy array and lifted the thick iron rod, gleaming with inscriptions, from the lab table. He still held it horizontally above his eyes, resting the wooden handle against his shoulder. He pointed the hollow end at the black stone wall at the far end of the observation room. Azdalan then keenly noticed a small brass bump beneath the wooden handle. What's this mechanism? Harvey maintained his aim, placing his finger on the brass bump and gently flicking it. The inscription on the thick iron rod instantly illuminated, accompanied by a strange sizzling sound. Azdalan only remembered seeing a pale white light blast out of the iron tube at an extremely fast speed, instantly disappearing into the black stone wall, leaving only a smooth, thumb-sized hole in the wall. Is this a weapon? An energy weapon? He walked to the wall with a look of disbelief, pulled a slender rangefinder probe from his waist, and inserted it through the hole. Completely penetrated the stone wall. The probe's length is limited, so we can't measure the true penetration distance. He turned his head, and the soul fire in the eye sockets of the metal skull shone unusually brightly. Harvey, this is terrifying. You should understand the significance of this invention. His tone was lamentable, yet also tinged with regret. This will shatter the instantaneous spellcasting that combat casters pride themselves on, putting research casters on par with them in combat power. Research casters adhere to the classical wizarding philosophy, using magical research to drive their advancement. Although their life force is closer to the transcendental, their lack of combat experience and spellcasting skills often means they are often thwarted by combat casters in terms of influence. The Spellcaster Union is a prime example. Due to the 100 Years' War with the Church, combat casters rose to power. If it weren't for the outbreak of the Demon War, which resulted in the heavy casualties among combat casters, they would have faced even greater exclusion and discrimination. As Dallin paced anxiously, muttering to himself, if this gets out, we'll undoubtedly be attacked mercilessly by the battle mages. In their eyes, this thing must be destroyed and buried. He suddenly froze, his hands bracing himself on the lab table, staring intently at Harvey and asking, besides instantaneous casting, what other properties does it have? How much mana does it require from the caster? How many attacks can you unleash with it? Harvey watched with startled expression with a touch of amusement, but he managed to hold it back. He handed the alchemical iron pipe to Dallin and patiently explained, its principle isn't instantaneous, it doesn't require the caster's own mana either. Anyone can use it and fire it when it's fully charged. Harvey smiled, raised his hand, and pointed at the stone wall, prompting Dallin to verify it for himself. After transforming into an alchemical being, you can no longer cast the spells you learned. Try it and you'll understand. Dallin seemed to haven't grasped the true meaning of Harvey's words, but he subconsciously followed his suggestion. As if bewitched, he mimicked Harvey's previous gesture, lifted the alchemical iron pipe, and turned the small mechanism. Two smooth holes of almost identical size appeared in the wall. Spells that can be cast without a caster, alchemical tools that ordinary people can use at will. Then, what's the point of becoming a spellcaster? Dallin leaned his back against a metal test bench, the heavy alchemical body creaking under its weight, as if encouraging and supporting his shaky ideals and beliefs. Harvey suddenly realized that he had been overdoing it and quickly walked over to pat his shoulder in comfort. Why are you overthinking this? Don't forget, this is something the caster invented and created. We need to understand that casters aren't as transcendent as they're advertised to be. We're just the lucky few who've stood out from the ordinary. Dallin accurately grasped Harvey's words, this is also something the caster created. His shattered faith instantly felt re-established, and he propped himself up and stood. If this magical weapon could be used at will without consuming the caster's mana, he paused, as if hesitant to ask the crucial question, and spoke hesitantly after a long pause. Can it recast energy attacks? Harvey nodded, pointing to the slightly dimmed inscription on the iron pipe. If my predictions aren't too far off, it should be able to be recast 3 to 5 times. After that, it'll need to be recharged with a focusing array. After all, it's essentially an alchemical life form powered by magic, just like you and Reiner. Dallin didn't know why, but he felt a sense of relief. It wasn't infinitely usable. It would eventually run out of energy, becoming a harmless, ordinary iron rod. But Harvey's next words sent him reeling. Well, that's okay. This thing can be mass-produced anyway. As long as there are enough beetles, I can quickly equip every civilian in the territory with one. Chapter 47, Equality in Exchange for Loyalty. Brothers Vaughn and Duff rose from their beds at the crack of dawn. Quickly building a fire in the fireplace, they heated up the wild boar soup left over from the previous night and devoured it with their daily barley bread. Vaughn, I heard from Uncle Rooney yesterday that after this month, the Lord will no longer provide us with free food, despite the simple furnishings of their new house. The two, accustomed to squatting for meals, maintained their habit of eating and drinking in front of the fireplace. Vaughn dabbed the last bite of bread in his soup bowl, smearing the fat all over it. We used to build the fort and the walls for the Lord, so we got free food. Now that the work is done and there's no work to do, why should we still be eating for free? Duff frowned, a hint of worry. The new civilians who moved in have been assigned to cultivate the land. I heard they're getting paid. The Lord also promised us money. Do you think? Vaughn wiped his mouth, stood up, and waved Duff off. Don't wait for charity, Dave. We're not slaves anymore, we're free men. We'll go to the main castle square and see if we can find some work. Vaughn had already figured it out. Even without free rations, the two of them would definitely not go hungry after hunting in the mountains. With that, they quickly packed up and strode barefoot towards the main castle square. Aside from Harvey's Lord's Keep and a few nearby warehouses storing supplies, the territory consisted of only a dense cluster of houses along the river. The other open spaces enclosed by walls were mostly simply cleared trees and piled with miscellaneous building materials. So there was no need to worry about getting lost. The Lord's main castle was the tallest and most prominent structure in the territory. The spacious area in front of the castle was paved with rubble, which was being repeatedly compacted by the heavy alchemical camel beasts pulling the stone rollers. A tall, eye-catching sign stood in the square, but no official notice was posted. Considering the tragic reality that almost all of the territory's citizens were illiterate, Harvey chose to attach a phonograph stone to a notice board, playing it repeatedly until its magic power was exhausted. Whenever there was new news to be announced, a prominent red circle would be drawn on the notice board, informing the public that the Lord's decree would be issued at noon that day. Vaughn clearly remembered the contents of the first two announcements. The first was something he vaguely understood, something called the Territory Basic Law. Basically, it stated that those caught committing crimes would be punished, and in serious cases, executed and then hung in the square to dry. He also attended the second announcement promptly. The Lord was recruiting workers to develop the farmland, but the requirement was that farmers familiar with the land and crops were eligible. This was a disappointment to Vaughn. He pulled Daff along and struggled to squeeze to the front of the crowd, relying on the orc's strong physical strength to secure a front position. He hoped that this announcement would bring new jobs suitable for him and Daff. Vaughn prayed silently. The midday sun in early summer wasn't too scorching. Harvey stood on the second floor of the main castle, looking out at the densely packed crowd in the square. The number of civilians who had moved into the territory had already approached 1,000. All thanks to Pierce and his alchemy beasts, who had repeatedly searched and patrolled the Glacial Valley area, rescuing several groups of refugees from the wasteland. This had directly led to a shortage of housing, forcing Harvey to pair up singles and move into the same house. Reiner walked to the square, holding a phonograph stone and hanging it in front of the notice board. As the magic energy was activated, the phonograph stone began to emit clear and loud voices. Starting today, we will recruit 50 men to form the territory militia. The Lord will provide them with free food, standard weapons, and a monthly salary. Recruitment requirements: male, aged 18 or older and under 35, in good health with no disabilities. Preference will be given to applicants with a history of hunting, fishing, climbing, or gathering. Vaughn's heart skipped a beat, the words about hunting prowess replaying in his mind. Aren't these me and Daff? He still remembered being praised by the Lord in person for his accurate throw and controlled power. Daff, standing nearby, leaped up in ecstasy, pulling Vaughn aside and shouting, "Vaughn, wow! We can enlist in the militia." He was already imagining himself parading through the streets in the same gleaming armor as those evil orc leaders, wielding a sharp short spear. Impressive. So impressive. Ugh! Vaughn quickly covered Daff's mouth to stop him from embarrassing himself in public. Turning to look at the crowd, he noticed that many young men looked eager to apply. After the announcement, the crowd gradually dispersed, leaving behind 70 or 80 eager applicants, likely interested candidates. It seems the military career is quite popular among civilians. Harvey nodded with satisfaction. Reiner stood in the square, watching the crowd gradually converge toward him. Glancing around, he saw no obvious unqualified candidates, and silently led them toward the back of the warehouse complex. Arriving at an open area with clearly compacted and hardened ground, he told everyone to wait while he informed Pierce, the territory's security officer, to conduct the interviews. With Reiner's departure, the previously silent applicants relaxed considerably, forming groups based on their relationships and beginning to chat. This caused some awkwardness for Vaughn and Dave, two orcs whose appearances were already distinct from the others. This group of newcomers was unlike the dozen or so who had arrived earlier. They were completely unfamiliar with the lords, constantly turning their heads and looking at the two men with a hint of unease. Soon, the crowd dispersed, and a group approached Vaughn and Dave. The leader, a man in his early 30s, approached the two squatting on the ground, leering them condescendingly. "Hey, Two half-human, half-beast bastards, you dare to apply for the Lord's guard. Dave flew into a rage, leaping to his feet despite Vaughn's restraint. What guard? The Lord is recruiting the militia. Anyone from the Lord can join, the man spat fiercely on the ground. So what? Whether it's the guard or the militia, we are recruiting humans. What does it have to do with you two bastards? He glanced at his companions gathered around him and shouted to the other onlookers. Who of you is willing to enlist with the bastards? Who is willing to fight alongside them? With each question, his companions erupted in laughter, and some among the onlookers echoed their demands. But the majority of the remaining civilians remained silent, unwilling to stand up for the orcs and offend their own kind. Vaughn and Dave's faces flushed crimson, and Dave's fist clenched, ready to strike the abominable face. Vaughn gritted his teeth, uttering a shaky, feeble defense. But, the Lord clearly said that we and, he was interrupted by a clear voice behind him before he could finish. Yes, I did say that within my territory, all citizens are equal. Harvey, accompanied by Reiner and Pierce, strode toward the crowd. The previously boisterous crowd fell silent, their heads bowed in fear, not daring to speak again. Didn't you hear the first decree I issued? Harvey asked calmly. Reiner immediately stepped forward and repeated his words expressionlessly. In Lord Harvey's territory, all citizens are equal and must not discriminate against one another. The man who had been the first to challenge the orc suddenly raised his head and argued defiantly, Sir, these two aren't even of our kind. They're bastards born from another race. Harvey narrowed his eyes and asked softly, What's your name? The man lowered his head again and replied in a trembling voice, Wayne, sir. Harvey hummed and nodded to Pierce. The hunter quickly stepped forward and delivered two hard, resounding slaps, sending him crashing to the ground. Wayne felt a ringing in his ears and a burning pain in his cheeks. Pierce's cold voice echoed in his ears. Who dares to question the Lord's orders? Who dares to disobey? Everyone lowered their heads even lower, some even stepping back in fear. Harvey then slowly spoke, Orcs are half human, and are half your compatriots. You can be dissatisfied and secretly look down on them, but don't let me catch you red-handed. He paused, then continued, if you're not convinced, join my territory's militia and we'll have a duel to see who's unworthy. With that, he turned and left with Reiner. Everyone knelt on the ground in greeting, and Vaughn, in particular, prostrated himself on the ground, his body trembling slightly with excitement, his eyes red and tears streaming. Not wanting them to see him weeping, he quietly grabbed a handful of dirt and smeared it across his face. He looked up at Harvey's departing back, his gaze filled with determination and fervor. As Dallin seemed to be deliberately lagging behind, he half knelt down and leaned close to Wayne's ear, whispering in a somewhat sinister tone, they once rescued a dozen civilians who were seriously injured by the evil orcs in the evil orc camp. If those people knew about your insults to them today, you can only pray that you will be more careful when you go out at night. Chapter 48 The Prototype of the Army. Vaughn, what on earth does Lord Pierce want us to do? Dave kept turning his head to talk to Vaughn as he ran forward. Vaughn's lung capacity wasn't as strong as his, and he rolled his eyes breathlessly, unable to speak a word. Following closely behind Vaughn was a young man named Tommy, one of the few who hadn't joined in the commotion when Vaughn and Dave were ostracized. After Wayne, the ringleader of the riot, was reprimanded by the Lord, Tommy and several other young men took the initiative to show goodwill to the two orcs and invited them to join their young group. Tommy ran as hard as Vaughn, but being a naturally outgoing and talkative man, he managed to speak to Dave through Vaughn despite the difficulty. Huh? Just keep making us run, huh? Non-stop running. Could it be, huh? The Lord is hoping, huh? If we encounter the enemy, huh? Do we run away? Upon hearing this, Dave immediately slowed down and turned back, grinning in amusement. I've been in the militia for a week now, running every day. My feet are covered in calluses. Why don't you two go get a pair of boots? Lord Pierce clearly said everyone gets a uniform. Alice, we're different from you. We're used to walking barefoot. Wearing boots won't just cause calluses, but blisters. Dave had barely finished his words when a pebble the size of a pigeon egg suddenly flew from a distance and struck him on the forehead with just the right amount of force, not enough to break the skin and bleed, but it instantly caused a bruise. Vaughn jumped, peeking over to see Lord Pierce standing on a wooden platform, clutching a leather rope. He'd almost forgotten that Lord Pierce was also a skilled slinger. If you don't run properly, everyone will get hit on the head, a cold voice rang out. Everyone immediately puffed out their chests and fell silent, quickening their pace. After barely managing to complete the scheduled 10 laps, The entire militia was exhausted and staggering. A few of the less stamina-ridden members collapsed to the ground, gasping for air. Immediately, several rocks flew in, striking the soft flesh of their waists squarely, sending them careening backward like frogs in pain. Stand still, rest for 5 minutes. Vaughn glanced sideways at the less skilled militiamen, feeling a wave of disdain. With such limited ability, they still dreamed of joining the militia and serving Lord Harvey. When selecting suitable candidates, over 80 met the basic requirements, but Lord Pierce had previously stated that they were only considered reserve members, and after a month of training, a further number would be eliminated. Vaughn had made up his mind that, even if it meant dying, he would never give up this opportunity to serve Lord Harvey. He had heard Lord Pierce announce that those who joined the reserves would receive a free full militia uniform. While serving the Lord, they would not only receive free food but also receive an additional monthly salary. Although he didn't know the exact amount of that salary, Vaughn couldn't help but grin when he saw the brand new, thick black cotton uniform and a pair of gleaming moccasins before him. He had never worn anything so fine in his life, anything that could be called clothing. Most of the time, he and Duff walked around bare-chested and barefoot, wearing only a greasy, dirty leather belt around their waists. When trying on their clothes, they both rushed to the river and scrubbed for half an hour, meticulously scraping the mud from their feet before finally putting on their new uniforms. But every day after training, Vaughn still refused to put on his new uniform and boots, fearing they would wear out. Pierce lashed them with a few lashes, only to find they preferred the punishment to their uniforms. Finally, he had no choice but to let them continue barefoot, but he sternly ordered them to wear their uniforms. Break over. Everyone stand at attention, 5 in a row, standing practice, Pierce shouted, and the scrambled team snapped into formation like a conditioned reflex. Each man held his head high, his hands resting vertically on his thighs, his back straight. Vaughn lasted only half an hour before the pain became unbearable, more strenuous than running 10 laps. He gritted his teeth and persevered, even as sweat streamed down his forehead and into his eyes, staring intently, his eyes red and motionless. While Pierce was avoiding the sun and heading for a covered rest area a little way away, Duff, standing in the row in front of him, couldn't help but relax quietly and was about to turn back to chat with him. A flying rock arrived late, and Vaughn, without even looking, could tell that Duff had 2 bumps on his head. Did Lord Pierce have eyes behind his back? 15 minutes later, some in the group began to stagger, but no one collapsed. Everyone knew that if everyone stood for a full hour, they would get a sizzling pork chop for lunch, in addition to barley bread and broth. No one wanted to be the unlucky one who fell behind and prevented the entire group from having a pork chop for lunch. After all, everyone had been living and eating in a warehouse-like bunkhouse for a month. If they were held responsible for lagging behind, they might be beaten after lights out. Vaughn simply didn't understand why the Lord had asked them to train like this. Could running and standing still alone really make them a match for fellow orcs? Some had complained in the first week, but after Lord Pierce easily dealt them a blow with a fist, no one questioned the training anymore. After all, being able to eat soft bread, hot broth, and fragrant barbecue every day was the most realistic thing. After an hour of standing practice, Pierce, as usual, gave everyone a 5-minute break to relax. This time, no one dared to sit down with their legs crossed, instead bending over to rub their sore, numb legs. Attention everyone. Form teams of 10 and run to the mess hall. Everyone perked up and immediately formed the required formation, chests puffed out. The person at the front even whispered a start, and everyone joined in the chant as they trotted towards the mess hall in unison. Vaughn couldn't help but recall the early days of training, when Master Pierce called for dinner and everyone cheered and scattered, then rushed to the mess hall in a chaotic frenzy. Of course, those times everyone had gone hungry as they wished. That was the price of not following orders. So now, without Master Pierce's command, no one dared to chew even if the barbecue was forced into their mouths. But the occasional swallowing sounds from the team occasionally drowned out the loud slogans. Be loyal to the Lord. Obey orders. Fight bravely. Protect the people. Vaughn had no idea how many times he had shouted this slogan, and he still understood the general meaning. However, as the training time grew longer, every time they marched neatly in front of other citizens while shouting slogans, the looks they gave them were filled with surprise, admiration, and envy. This made him secretly feel a strange warmth welling up in his heart, and he couldn't help but want to straighten his chest, stand straighter, and shout slogans louder. Vaughn felt that the other militia members should be feeling the same way. However, at the time, he didn't know that this strange feeling of complacency and satisfaction was called pride. If you are listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means it was downloaded and re-uploaded without effort. We warmly invite you to visit our channel, Fanfic World. There you will find the original version of this story and many other novels of various genres. We look forward to seeing you dive into a world of incredible novels. Chapter 49 Literacy Education. Pierce, temporarily appointed commander of the New Territories militia, was increasingly confused by Harvey's intentions. He'd previously instructed the reserve militia to run around the playground and then stand still in the sun, which Pierce understood as Harvey's desire to train a force of exceptional endurance and unwavering obedience. During a private lesson with Pierce, Mr. Asdalen had casually mentioned that his wizarding family had a method for training knights. However, it took 8 years, from the age of 8 to 16, to cultivate a warrior proficient in various weapons and combat skills. Another 6 years, using extensive medicinal supplements and specialized training methods to stimulate the warrior's bloodline, could cultivate a qualified knight to serve as a wizard's personal squire. But the crucial prerequisite was that the trainee must come from a knightly family with a legacy of bloodline power. Thinking back on the group of clueless civilians he'd trained, Pierce felt even more that expecting them to unleash their fighting prowess was pure fantasy. So, after persevering through a month of training as a team leader, he finally couldn't help but seek out Harvey for help. "Don't worry, and don't worry about your methods being wrong," Harvey patted Pierce's shoulder. "In my territory, background isn't important, only strength matters." He stood up and handed Pierce a thin booklet. "Select 2 outstanding captains ahead of time. The militia will expand in the future, so you need to develop your right-hand men. Take a look at this training manual, I think it will be of great help." Pierce took the manual, flipped it open, and quickly read through it. His head was buzzing, and he was completely stunned. The training content was completely unheard of. The assembly whistle blew at 6 a.m., and the team had 15 minutes to assemble, then began a march around the training square. This was followed by standing at attention drills, repeated several times for an hour until noon. After lunch, he led the entire team on a cross-country run around the territory's wall. All militia members were required to be assessed. While mutual assistance and coordination were allowed, everyone had to complete the run, and no one had to give up. After lights out at night, emergency whistles were blown randomly between 10 and 1 in the morning, requiring all militia members to assemble within 5 minutes. "Sir, if we keep going like this, I'm afraid the team will fall apart in less than a week." "Right." He flipped to the last page of the manual, completely stunned. "Every day after dinner, before lights out, all militia members must undergo literacy training with Asdalen." "Sir, what do you mean by literacy training? Do you want them to learn magic as well?" Harvey smiled. "I hope they have that talent, but that's wishful thinking. I'm only asking Asdalen to teach them how to read and write, so they can do their best to understand orders." Tommy poked his head out from the upper bunk of the wooden double bed and looked at Vaughn, who was struggling in the lower bunk. He chuckled and teased, "Brother Vaughn, it's just 1 page, and you haven't memorized it yet." Vaughn didn't look up to acknowledge him, but his large, protruding ears instantly turned red. He felt a little ashamed. 5 days ago, all the militia members had begun a nighttime literacy class, taught by Mr. Asdalen, a tall, imposing figure, like Mr. Reiner, clad entirely in metal. Mr. Asdalen was gentle, and in the first 2 lessons, he taught them the basics of reading, writing, pronunciation, and alphabetical correspondence. He also thoughtfully gave everyone a phonetic chart, asking them to memorize it in their free time. He assigned everyone the task of memorizing the chart within a week. If they did so correctly, they would receive a reward, personally prepared by him. People like Tommy, who were familiar with him, were clearly young and quick-witted, having memorized most of it in just 2 nights. Only Vaughn felt a sense of embarrassment. With the test approaching, he was still struggling to memorize it. As for Dave, he was completely clueless and simply gave up. Vaughn wasn't as carefree as Dave. Ever since facing discrimination and insults from Wayne's group, he had never forgotten the words Sir Harvey had spoken in his defense. "After becoming my territory's militia, let's compete in strength to see who's unworthy." He couldn't fail, he had to be the best and never let Lord Harvey down. Harvey's predictions were spot on. As time passed, sightings of evil orcs in the glacial valley became more frequent. It seemed the demonic invasion of their territory had intensified, and those small and medium-sized tribes, unable to resist, were migrating south, looting and plundering along the way. Before long, the entire Divine Spine Mountains will probably be swarming with southbound evil orcs, Harvey said anxiously, looking at his 3 trusted assistants. Reiner now spent his days leading his subjects in the land reclamation, manipulating his few agricultural alchemy beasts to plow the fields and sow barley, wheat, and other staples. Besides participating in Harvey's research experiments, he spent all his time in the fields, often forgetting to recharge his energy, only to be carried back to the main fort when it ran out. Asdalen, taking Reiner's place, became Harvey's lab assistant, assisting him with the mass transformation of alchemy beasts and the research and development of energy ores and new weapons. However, he also had to find time to juggle literacy training for the militia and the basic education of the 40 or so children under the age of 16 in the territory. Harvey had repeatedly emphasized the importance of education for his subjects, and he was wary of any negligence, fearing it would affect Harvey's future plans. As for Pierce, he was even more busy. 5 days a week, he had to closely monitor the militia's daily training, never letting up even for a moment. 2 days a week, he led the wolf spider beasts on repeated searches and patrols around the glacial valley, guarding against the evil orcs crossing the river and rescuing the occasional refugees from the wasteland. One only regrets having too few people when they need them, Harvey sighed silently, observing his 3 overwhelmed assistants. In order to defend his painstakingly conquered new territory against the massive incursion of the fell orcs along the Divine Spine Mountains, Harvey, lacking abundant food reserves and a battle-hardened army, felt he had no choice but to take a risky gamble. He needed to harness advanced magical technology to craft weapons to gain an absolute advantage in battle. The magic gun, nearing completion, was undoubtedly the perfect answer. However, this presented him with a stark dilemma. The release of such a weapon would undoubtedly dethrone the once noble and powerful spellcasters. This included him. Asdalen had repeatedly expressed his anxiety and concern about this matter. He believed that if the truth were revealed, or the weapon's technology were cracked and copied, it would inevitably trigger a violent conflict between the nobility and the spellcasters. The Church would also seize the opportunity to disrupt the situation, plunging the continent's human kingdoms into an all-out civil war among 3 major interest groups. But Harvey felt he had no choice. He simply had to firmly control the core technology and raw materials for manufacturing the weapons, and then equip them with an army loyal to him. Harvey believed he could control the situation. I need to find a way to improve my own strength. A beginner spellcaster is truly vulnerable. Chapter 50 Crazy Ore Research. The dwarf Copperhammer had been feeling extremely irritable for the past few days. He blamed it all on a mysterious ore he'd purchased for 500 gold pounds on a forum on the magic net. That villain, codenamed Kilthuzid, thought Copperhammer bitterly, thinking he must be at his wit's end with the ore, willing to generously share it, potentially harming even more people. What kind of mineral was it? Why couldn't he analyze it no matter what he tried? Copperhammer kept going back and forth between the mineral laboratory and his study, frequently consulting historical records and tomes from various periods, even consuming several extremely valuable analytical materials in his experiments. He didn't dare to violently cut the ore apart, fearing that the ore's fragility would quickly dissipate the magical properties it contained. Is the only way to place a bounty on the forum? The dwarf slumped dejectedly in his chair, staring blankly at the ore on the lab table. No. He couldn't show weakness on the forum, especially in the area of knowledge he was most skilled and proud of. After all, Kilthuzid had previously disclosed information about the ore at the forum, and most members would likely be focused on me, having struck a deal with him. If anyone discovered I'd posted a request for ore analysis on the forum, others wouldn't say anything, but that Son of Fire would undoubtedly be the first to laugh at me. Copperhammer straightened himself up, rallied, and climbed up a ladder to pull a thick-bound, ancient tome from the bookshelf. Records of research on magical minerals in the Age of Dragons, he said, his brow furrowed. Copperhammer, stop wasting time on that damned ore, the dwarf leader, Nori, scolded, frowning. We've almost exhausted our points just to secure an invitation for a new forum member. We've replicated the teleportation array almost exactly, but we still can't teleport. If this keeps up, when autumn arrives and those shameless ore merchants arrive in the Crypt City, we'll be left at their mercy again. Copperhammer slumped over the lab table, muttering to himself like a man possessed. You don't understand, you don't understand. There can't possibly be a mineral in this world whose properties I don't even understand. Even in a layer, the Union recognizes my identification skills. Ancient texts do indeed mention several magical materials that could be used to analyze minerals, but most of them are nearly extinct species. Copperhammer searched the entire treasury of the underground city but couldn't find a single one. Corrupted gargoyle's eyeball, a hybrid unicorn's horn, a ghost-faced octopus's ink, the blood of a high-level vampire. These invaluable spellcasting materials can only be found in the magical vaults of legendary spellcasters. Wait! Copperhammer suddenly had an idea. A legendary spellcaster, wasn't there one on the MagicNet forum? He leaped from his chair, rushed over to the leader, Nolly, grabbed his collar, and demanded with red eyes. How many forum points do you have left? With the arrival of new members on the MagicNet forum, Harvey began to receive several payments for the purchase of magic teleportation arrays. This slightly improved his cash flow, which had been strained by the rapid construction of his territory and the massive purchase of daily necessities. He used this capital to purchase a batch of hollow, single-piece iron pipes from the Dragonstone Merchant Guild. This type of metalworking was only possible within the Alchemy Quest's workshops. The Dragonstone Merchant Guild, with its close partnerships with the Quest's various industries, was the ideal intermediary. Harvey wasn't concerned about the overpayment for the goods or the high shipping costs. After all, these materials were to be used to craft a magic gun, and when it came to strengthening his own strength, Harvey was not one to skimp on money. Of course, ordinary iron pipes weren't as good as the initial trial-made magic gun, crafted from alchemical metal infused with magical materials. This was because ordinary iron pipes were inferior to alchemical metal in both engraving and energy conduction. The resulting magic gun not only had half the range and penetration of the original, but also had a limited firing rate of 3, requiring a recharge through a focusing array before it could be used again. Harvey's idea was to build him 50 first, just to make do. After all, the demonic beastmen were practically on his doorstep, and with a gun in hand, he felt less anxious. Do we really want to hand over such terrifyingly powerful weapons to civilians? As Darren asked again, somewhat uncertainly. Harvey put down the assembled parts in his hand and said with a relaxed attitude, "Why are you still agonizing over this? I'm not going to give out all the weapons at once." He pointed to the 5 low-profile magic guns that had just been assembled on the laboratory table. Pierce needs one. Let him familiarize himself with its use first and practice aiming and shooting repeatedly. The remaining 4 will be given to the squad leader and vice captain of the militia. These individuals have been personally assessed and observed by Pierce, and their loyalty and ability will be impeccable. Harvey paused, then added, "Don't worry. Even if these weapons accidentally fall into enemy hands, they won't be able to replicate them without the beetle, or secondly, without the energy focusing array to recharge them, they'll be useless as iron firesticks." As Dallin sighed slowly, seemingly convinced. "Okay, let Pierce test the weapons tomorrow." Pierce arrived at the basement lab early in the morning and mastered the new weapons in just half an hour. The black iron tube, which belched powerful magical energy, fired with a simple aim, just like countless times before, gently pulling the brass trigger at the base of the wooden handle. Pierce had always considered himself gifted at hunting and killing. He was proficient with all types of bows, skillfully wielding a short sword and dagger, and nearly unerringly accurate with his lasso and stone throw. However, these skills required years of repeated practice and actual combat to master. The fact that he mastered a magical weapon in half an hour wasn't entirely due to Pierce's own understanding and experience, but rather the sheer simplicity of this strange iron pipe weapon. Pierce practiced the aiming and shooting positions Harvey had taught him several times. Harvey then had him pick up a fully charged magic gun and test the results with live ammunition. His target, naturally, was the impenetrable black stone wall of the observation room. Standing 15 meters away, Pierce aimed his magic gun horizontally and pulled the trigger. With a soft click, a beam of white light shot out from the muzzle. 15 meters away, a third, smooth-edged hole appeared in the stone wall. It didn't fully penetrate the stone wall. "Looks like its power has been greatly reduced," as usual, as Dallin pulled out his rangefinder probe and deftly inserted it into the hole. He found that the energy beam had only penetrated halfway through the wall, originally only half a meter thick. Pierce also leaned over to observe. He had been responsible for cutting and trimming these incredibly hard black stone blocks during the construction of the basement, so he was well aware of their exact hardness. Even Reiner had to swing his hammer with all his might to knock off even a tiny fragment. This penetrating power is truly terrifying. The hunter looked at Asdalen with some horror. Could it even penetrate your and Reiner's alchemical prosthesis? Reiner, having just arrived at the lab, overheard Pierce's alarmist remarks and quickly agreed, it can only penetrate my patchwork body, not Mr. Asdalen's advanced prosthesis. Harvey and Asdalen both laughed, and Reiner was secretly hinting to Harvey to replace him with a better quality alchemical prosthesis. Alright, stop beating around the bush, Reiner. Your new prosthetic won't arrive for a few months. I customized it especially for you. The fire in Reiner's eyes suddenly brightened. Really? My lord, really? He seemed to want to hug Harvey, but was afraid of breaking his ribs if he used too much force. So he could only raise his hands high at Harvey's side and cheer loudly. Long live my lord! Long live my lord! I'm finally getting an upgrade. End of this chapter. Thank you so much for reading until the end. Don't forget to give it a like. Looking for more exclusive content and immediate access? Subscribe to our Patreon. Remember, every like, subscription or donation encourages us to continue. Thank you all. See you in the next video.